Chapter 1, The Wedding. 9 days later, enchanting the husbands. Her chest began to ache sharply again, and Victoria knew her heart palpitations had returned. Clutching her chest, she fainted in front of the vanity. At that moment, a mysterious man with wings appeared, gently collected her soul, and vanished from the room. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a grand, luxurious room. On a large bed adorned with red silk embroidered with mandarin ducks lay a set of exquisite red phoenix coronet and robe hanging nearby. Victoria stood up, realizing she was in someone else's room. Even the clothes she had worn before fainting had been completely changed. She quickly glanced at the bronze mirror beside her. Reflected in the mirror was a delicate, stunningly beautiful young girl, around 17 or 18 years old. What shocked her most was that this girl bore an 80% resemblance to her, only much younger. Before she could speculate about her situation, an unfamiliar voice sounded behind her. "You've woken up." Following the direction of the voice, Victoria turned around. She saw a handsome man with a tall, imposing figure, his face partially veiled. His long, ink-black hair flowed freely in the wind. Through the thin veil, she could faintly discern his exquisitely beautiful features, almost feminine in their perfection, radiating a brilliance like blooming flowers. At this moment, the man stood tall at the door, idly playing with a jade fan. His presence exuded an allure as mesmerizing as the full moon, dimming the splendor of the entire room. The man had eyes as beautiful as crystal, with noble, enchanting purple irises that gazed at Victoria with elegance and charm. She stared back at him, captivated. Ahem. A light cough snapped Victoria out of her daze. "Who are you? May I ask where this is?" Victoria blinked her large, curious eyes and asked the mysterious man like an innocent child. The man quickly stepped into the room, startling Victoria, who instinctively stepped back several paces, nearly stumbling into the vanity. "Careful, little sister." The man effortlessly pulled Victoria into his arms, leaving her mind blank as if something had taken over her. Gently brushing her hair aside, he touched her forehead a few times and murmured, "No fever." "Who's feverish now? Who on earth are you?" Victoria immediately snapped out of her daze, glaring at the man in front of her. She pushed him away forcefully with both hands. The man seemed a bit puzzled. Normally, this silly girl would obediently follow his every word. Even when she got mischievous, it was never as unusual as today. "Little sister, I'm Leon Harlow, your cousin. I heard you tried to escape your arranged marriage but got caught by the servants. Rather than return home, you knocked yourself out by running into a stone pillar. Don't tell me you don't remember anything." Hearing the man, who claimed to be her cousin, respond, Victoria had no choice but to sober up from her scattered thoughts. "So, I'm your little sister. Then who am I? And I'm supposed to get married to someone? How pitiful is that?" Victoria's voice was clear and pleasant, but her fierce tone was far from commendable. She resembled a little tiger, flailing her arms and legs in frustration. "Little sister, you'd better put on your wedding dress. This time, there's no escaping. The family head is serious now. Not only has he set up an inescapable net around Harlow Fortress, but he's also stationed hundreds of guards to keep watch. Just accept your fate." Leon Harlow shook his head as he turned and left the room, disappearing from Victoria's sight. Victoria was overwhelmed with confusion. How had she ended up in this place, about to become a bride? All of it left her mind in turmoil. After a few minutes of dazed contemplation, she shook herself free from the mysteries. The most pressing matter now was to escape this marriage. She was a proper young lady, untainted and pure. How could she be married off just like that? Besides, she hadn't even met the groom. If he turned out to be a handsome man, she might reluctantly accept it. But what if he was a disabled man missing limbs? That would be too much to bear. Victoria thought to herself that running away recklessly wouldn't work. With hundreds of guards outside and an inescapable net laid out, she needed a flawless plan to ensure her safety. Suddenly, an idea struck her, a brilliant one to protect herself. For now, she decided to go along and put on the wedding dress. She thought, let's take it one step at a time. After dressing up, she lightly applied some makeup. In the mirror, Victoria looked even more stunning and captivating, a vision that would leave anyone in awe. She pulled the red veil over her phoenix coronet, concealing her beautiful face. Sitting gracefully and elegantly on the chair, she called out to the maid outside, "Take me to see the family head immediately." You push the door open and step inside, finding Victoria already dressed and groomed. Cheerfully, you say, "My lady, you look stunning today. Are you planning to make young Master Orton lose his composure?" Young Master Orton. Victoria lowers her head. Her maid assumes she is shy and stops teasing. Meanwhile, Victoria silently thinks that young Master Orton is likely the man she will have to marry. If he turns out to be unattractive, she plans to refuse the marriage immediately. "My lady, shall I escort you to meet the lord in the hall?" Victoria nods and places her hand on the maid's arm. They take no more than 10 steps outside the room before 5 other maids approach, carrying crispy fried decorations shaped like festive characters, ready to adorn the bridal chamber. "Greetings, my lady. You look like a celestial being descended to earth today." These maids, with their honeyed words, bring joy to Victoria's heart. She smiles and says, "Reward them." The maids quickly kneel, thanking her profusely for the generosity. "Sister Victoria, let me escort you." A lavishly dressed woman steps forward, taking Victoria by the arm. "Greetings, Lady Sophia Harlow." The maids bow again, this time to the woman named Sophia Harlow. Victoria is well aware of this woman's significant background and knows she must not be underestimated. It would be wise to establish a good relationship. She thinks perhaps Sophia could truly be a trustworthy ally, so she decides to maintain a polite demeanor for now. "Thank you for the trouble, Sister Sophia Harlow," Victoria replies. From Sophia's earlier address of Sister Victoria, she deduces that Sophia must be older than herself, otherwise, why would she use such a term? Victoria responds slowly, her tone calm and measured, exuding an air of elegance. Sophia Harlow takes the maid's place, while the others fall into line. The wedding ceremony is set to take place in the grandest hall of the Harlow family estate. Along the way, the courtyard is adorned with lanterns and flowers, creating a dazzling display. As they pass the main hall, Victoria notices a man with a scruffy beard, clearly someone who pays little attention to appearances, mingling with the wedding guests. Suddenly, Sophia steps forward, grabs the man's hand, and says, "Father, take your time. Look, isn't Sister Victoria absolutely beautiful today?" The man is none other than Charles Harlow, the master of Harlow Fortress. Smiling warmly, Charles walks toward Victoria. Sophia quickly calls out, "Sister Victoria, come greet father." Victoria finally understands, her father is the one forcing her into this marriage. She silently vows to make him regret it in the future. Still, she maintains her composure and steps forward to bow, "Greetings, father." The word "father" comes out somewhat awkwardly. "Stand up, stand up. Today is your special day, no need for formalities," Charles Harlow says, stroking his beard as he helps Victoria rise. The master of Harlow Fortress beams with joy as he looks at his daughter, his delight growing with every glance. The hour of the monkey arrived, the auspicious time was here, and the sound of firecrackers echoed continuously. The melody of bamboo flutes filled the air as Sophia Harlow and the fortress master escorted Victoria gracefully into the grand hall. Victoria's eyes drifted toward the faint figure of a man in red ahead, her soon-to-be husband, Randy Orton, the young master of the Orton family. She stepped beside young Master Orton and accepted the end of the red silk ribbon from his hand. The fortress master laughed heartily, "Randy, from now on, Victoria is in your care. Treat her well and don't bully her, or Harlow Fortress will flatten your family." Randy Orton, understanding that his father-in-law was testing him, quickly poured Charles Harlow a cup of wine. "Father-in-law, rest assured. Little sister Victoria will become my wife, and I will certainly treat her well." Meanwhile, Victoria thought to herself, "It's happening. The ceremony is about to begin. Am I really getting married? Although this man is decent looking, he's not exactly my type. I guess I'll just see how things go." Sophia Harlow, officiating the wedding, saw that the bride and groom were in position and loudly announced, "First bow to the heavens and earth." Randy Orton and Victoria turned, preparing to kneel on the red carpet. Just then, a sharp voice rang out from the doorway, "Wait." Victoria's heart leaped with joy. Finally, someone had come to disrupt the ceremony. A flash of purple appeared, and a beautiful young woman in a jade-green robe stood smiling brightly in the center of the courtyard. Victoria let out a sigh of relief. This girl was clearly here to cause trouble, and her timing couldn't have been better. "Iris Storm, have you caused enough trouble already?" a stern voice shouted. Randy Orton hurriedly rushed out of the hall into the courtyard. A few hot-tempered guards immediately moved to intervene. Randy Orton furrowed his brows. Looking toward Iris Storm, who was about to draw her sword, and shouted loudly, "Stop. Don't act recklessly." Everyone turned their gazes toward Randy Orton. He explained, "Today is the joyous occasion of my wedding to Miss Harlow, the Fortress Master's daughter. I ask Miss Storm not to cause trouble. Miss Storm has come here to offer her congratulations, making her a distinguished guest of mine. I kindly request everyone to give me face and temporarily overlook any offenses from Miss Storm. Do not be disrespectful to her." The guards, hearing this, snorted coldly, thinking to themselves, "This is Harlow Fortress, even the fortress master hasn't spoken yet, so what right does this groom have to give orders and make demands?" However, since Randy Orton was the main figure of the day, they dared not offend him and thus stepped back. Randy Orton turned to Iris Storm, speaking coolly, "Miss Storm, you and I have long since severed any ties. Today, you come to disrupt my wedding. What exactly is your purpose?" Iris Storm looked ahead. Randy Orton indeed appeared extraordinarily handsome today. Though she couldn't clearly see the bride's face, her graceful figure and elegant, orchid-like demeanor were unmistakable signs of a peerless beauty. In the center of the grand hall hung a large banner with the words, "A Perfect Union," inscribed on it. A deep bitterness welled up in Iris Storm's heart. Why was it not her that Randy Orton was marrying? Victoria watched the unfolding drama coldly, with no trace of anger in her eyes, as if today's events had nothing to do with her. Meanwhile, Sophia Harlow, the fortress master, and the other guests behind her all glared furiously at the exchange between Randy Orton and Iris Storm. Chapter 2, The Wedding Chaos. Randy Orton, even though you are the young master of Orton Manor, a man of honor, how can you not keep your word? Iris Storm's gaze was somewhat dreamy, yet carried a sense of seriousness and sorrow. A fleeting look of hesitation appeared on Randy Orton's face, but he quickly composed himself, understanding the time and place they were in today. Moreover, this was the territory of Lord Harlow. He swiftly masked his emotions and replied, "What Randy says, he naturally keeps his word." Under the red veil, Victoria pouted slightly, sensing that the tone of these two was quite unusual. She could even clearly notice Randy Orton's small, hesitant movements beside her. "Good, what a fine statement about keeping your word. You promised to come back and marry me, yet you left me waiting for 3 years. And now, here you are, about to marry this woman." The more Iris Storm spoke, the more tears streamed down her face as she glared at Randy Orton with anger and heartbreak. Lord Harlow thought to himself, something's not right. Could it be that this man already has a lover elsewhere? But now, there's no turning back. Eager to marry off his daughter, Lord Harlow had no choice but to protect his future son-in-law. He intervened, saying, "Miss Storm, do you have an urgent matter to settle with Randy here?" Right now is the auspicious time for my son-in-law and daughter to complete their wedding rites. Please set other matters aside for now and refrain from causing disruption. Miss Storm, kindly take a seat over there. Later, I will personally offer you 3 cups of wine as an apology. What do you think? Iris Storm, paying no heed to his words, immediately drew her sword and pointed it straight at Randy Orton. She declared, "You heartless man. If you truly intend to marry her today, then I will follow you to the underworld and rekindle our bond in the afterlife." Iris Storm's words were heart-wrenching and full of despair, but the others remained clueless, unable to grasp how the situation had escalated to this point. As expected, Randy Orton immediately furrowed his brows, seemingly deep in thought. Fortress Master Harlow, standing nearby, could no longer tolerate the situation. After all, this was his territory. How could he allow such chaos here? How would he maintain his dignity in the future? In a swift motion, Fortress Master Harlow appeared before Randy Orton and delivered a palm strike to his chest. Caught off guard, Randy Orton had no time to defend himself and was sent flying 3 meters away, crashing to the ground. Blood spurted from his mouth as he propped himself up with one hand while clutching the spot where Harlow's strike had landed with the other. Witnessing this scene, Iris Storm froze in shock, trembling all over, and stammered, "Fortress Master, what are you doing? Why did you seriously injure him?" She quickly retrieved her sword, which had been hovering mid-air, and sheathed it. Randy Orton hurriedly exclaimed, "Father-in-law, what are you doing?" Fortress Master Harlow didn't spare Randy a glance, sighed deeply, and said coldly, "Miss Storm, I will no longer interfere in the personal matters between the two of you. Randy is now yours to deal with." With that, he turned and began walking away. Iris Storm snapped out of her daze and quickly called after him, "Harlow. Fortress Master Harlow, please wait." Harlow stopped in his tracks, turned back with a frosty expression, and said, "I've entrusted Randy Orton to you. Or do you intend to insult Harlow Fortress by suggesting we lack capable people? If you don't want to deal with him, then marry my daughter already. Stop hesitating, or you'll regret it for the rest of your life." With those words, he didn't pause any longer and walked straight out. Seeing the situation, Victoria realized her chance had come. Today's wedding was certainly not going to happen, and she could consider herself off the hook. After all, she didn't like that pretty boy Randy Orton. If she truly liked him, she would have stepped in to stop everything, but unfortunately, she didn't. Now, all she could do was sit back and enjoy the show. Iris Storm, already filled with resentment, heard Harlow's words and immediately wanted to take Randy Orton's life with one strike of her sword before ending her own, joining him in death. She drew her blade and charged toward Randy Orton, who was lying on the ground groaning in pain. Seeing this, Randy Orton wanted to dodge, but the earlier blow had left him in no condition to move. Just as danger loomed, a voice called out, "Miss Storm, please wait. Let's discuss this calmly." Sophia Harlow, who had been watching the drama unfold, suddenly spoke up. She appeared worried, but Iris Storm only quickened her pace upon hearing her. Sophia Harlow hurriedly rushed forward and grabbed Iris Storm's hand. "Miss Storm, please listen to me for a moment. After I've spoken, you can do whatever you want." A flicker of doubt crossed Iris Storm's eyes. She stopped and said, "All right, Miss Sophia Harlow, I'd like to hear what you have to say." Sophia Harlow nodded and pulled Iris Storm into a small corner nearby. Chapter 3, Ruthless Action. Sophia Harlow turned her head, her face filled with guilt, wanting to explain to Iris Storm. However, Iris Storm, wary at heart, let out a cold snort and walked toward the corner of the room. Gritting her teeth, Sophia Harlow hurriedly chased after Iris Storm. A flash of green swept past, quickly catching up and overtaking Iris Storm. From the green sleeve, a pair of slender jade-like hands extended, blocking the doorway. Iris Storm hesitated for a moment but immediately reacted, letting out another cold snort. "I never expected Miss Sophia Harlow to also be a martial artist." The daughters of Harlow Fortress are indeed formidable and not to be underestimated. Miss Storm, you flatter me. Could you give me a moment to explain? Sophia Harlow firmly grabbed Iris Storm's arms, gently shaking them as she spoke. Seeing this, Iris Storm fell silent. Whatever needed explaining, she reluctantly nodded in agreement with a faint Noticing Iris Storm had calmed down, Sophia Harlow wasted no time, leaning close to Iris Storm's ear and whispering for several minutes. Iris Storm, half believing and half doubting, pondered for a moment before lightly waving her left hand. Sophia Harlow suddenly felt a numbness in her wrist and had no choice but to release Iris Storm's arms. How admirable for a devoted Orton heir, Randy Orton. You trample on and discard me so heartlessly, all for the sake of Orton Manor. Iris Storm, displaying extraordinary agility, suddenly appeared in front of Randy Orton. Her orchid-like hands lightly brushed against him before pulling back. Randy Orton, realizing Iris Storm did not retaliate as harshly as before, felt a twinge of shame. He hastily said, "Iris Storm, please understand my predicament. The engagement from before, I truly cannot fulfill it, but I can." Iris Storm had long anticipated this response. Randy Orton stopped mid-sentence, both anxious and hopeful, and added, "Orton Manor is my very lifeblood, Iris Storm. Please, I beg your understanding." Iris Storm, suppressing her sorrow, spoke coldly, "In the White Mountains, filial piety comes first. I, Iris Storm, am not someone who lacks propriety. Go now, I won't kill you anymore." This play, with one person asking and another answering, drew immense curiosity from everyone around. Randy Orton, hearing Iris Storm belittle him, felt a flicker of anger. He coldly observed the scene, growing more wary of the current Iris Storm. Given Iris Storm's temperament, when Randy Orton abandoned her and left, she should have turned against him, seeking revenge at all costs. Yet unexpectedly. "Thank you," Randy Orton was overjoyed when he heard Iris Storm was willing to let him go. However, Iris Storm interrupted him, speaking coldly, "Young Master Orton, in the past, you treated me well. Today, I originally intended for us to perish together. But considering your filial piety, from now on, our ties are severed." Randy Orton was horrified upon hearing this and exclaimed, "Iris Storm, you mustn't." Iris Storm responded with a cold laugh, "Back then, it was you who wronged me, not the other way around." As she spoke, she retrieved a jade pendant from her sleeve. "This is the engagement token you gave me years ago." With that, she held the jade pendant, pressing it firmly with both hands. The flawless, unblemished jade instantly crumbled into powder, scattering to the ground. Iris Storm turned away, dusting the jade powder off her hands, and declared, "I, Iris Storm, owe you nothing anymore. From this day forward, there's no connection between us. If we meet again, I will kill you to appease my anger." With that, Iris Storm didn't spare Randy Orton another glance. Her figure, light as a cloud, disappeared swiftly, her martial arts skills no less impressive than those of a martial sovereign. Randy Orton watched as Iris Storm departed and sighed silently. He hadn't expected that this woman, after years of not meeting, was already on the verge of breaking through to the martial sovereign realm. Sophia Harlow, seeing that everything had been resolved, ordered a maid to invite the master of the manor. At this moment, Victoria, who had been standing silently on the side, suddenly shuddered. Could it be they were planning to hold another wedding? Sunlight filtered through the dense, small bamboo forest, casting dappled patches on the ground teeming with vitality. The warm sunshine spread everywhere, tiny blossoms danced in the air, and the lush green grass stretched endlessly. The fragrant scent of grass, delicate as silk, seeped into the heart, awakening the weary body from the sluggishness of spring. Iris Storm closed his eyes and spread his arms, his entire being immersed in the cool spring breeze, as if transforming into the wind to soar freely. At this moment, he no longer loved nor hated. "Master, Miss Sophia Harlow said everything has been resolved and invites you outside." The maid, being considerate, intentionally lowered her voice, knowing the master was in a poor mood. The master simply replied, stood up, placed the book in his hand down, and followed the maid toward the backyard. Ahem, has Sophia Harlow really taken care of everything? Charles Harlow glanced at Randy Orton, who was lying on the ground gasping for breath, and asked Sophia Harlow again. The others and the guests, seeing the master step out, realized today's events, if leaked, would surely disgrace Harlow Fortress. They assumed Charles Harlow would see things through to the end, so one by one, they began to bid farewell to Master Harlow, expressing their intention to leave. Charles Harlow, preoccupied, paid no attention to these matters and did not respond, letting the guests leave as they pleased. Father, everything that needed resolving has been taken care of. Now, tell me, what should we do with Randy Orton? Do you still want to force him to marry Victoria? Sophia Harlow pointed at Randy Orton and asked Charles Harlow. I don't want to. Victoria, who had come down at some point, shouted as she delivered 2 swift kicks to Randy Orton, each one targeting a sensitive spot. Victoria, stop making trouble. Go back to your room and change your clothes. Later, come to my study, I have something to discuss with you. Go now. Victoria, who already didn't want to stay here any longer, quickly headed back to her room. Randy Orton, Harlow Fortress will no longer accommodate you. Guards, escort young Master Orton back to Orton Manor. In his heart, Randy Orton thought, what am I supposed to be in all of this? Truly miserable beyond words, yet he dared not show it, fearing Charles Harlow might kill him. After resolving the matter, Charles Harlow didn't even look back and went straight into his study. Harlow Fortress is located in the center of the continent of martial resolve, known as a prestigious and renowned family. The continent of martial resolve is an ancient land with a long history, where martial arts reign supreme. Only those with martial aptitude are considered worthy. The levels of martial arts, from lowest to highest, are martial disciple, martial practitioner, martial artist, martial master, martial saint, and martial immortal. As for the legendary martial god realm, it has only appeared once during the Great War a million years ago and has not been seen since. The second young lady of Harlow Fortress, Victoria Harlow, was born with extremely poor aptitude, as bad as it could possibly be. She began cultivating her martial body at the age of 10, and now at 17, she was still worlds apart from her elder sister, Sophia Harlow. Her elder sister, just 1 year older, had already reached the martial master level, while Victoria remained stuck in the martial practitioner realm. This Victoria shared the same name as the original Victoria Harlow but was brought to the continent of martial resolve by a mysterious man. In truth, the original Victoria Harlow had died while fleeing from an arranged marriage. The current Victoria Harlow was actually another soul inhabiting this body. So, who was the mysterious man that brought Victoria to this continent? At this moment, Victoria lay on her bed, snacking and pondering over this very question. Chapter 4, Annual Evaluation. Victoria ate while pondering how she had ended up here. Sometimes, she felt that living like this wasn't so bad. In truth, Victoria was a person who was easily content. Taking a deep breath, she stepped off the bed, left her room, and quickly headed toward the master's chambers. Halfway there, Victoria suddenly realized she was still unfamiliar with everything in this place. How could she possibly know where the master's room was? Just then, a guard approached. "Second miss, the master is already waiting for you in his room," the guard said before leading the way. Victoria followed, thinking to herself that this guard was truly a man of few words. Not a single sentence was exchanged along the way. At Harlow Fortress, Charles Harlow had 5 children, 2 daughters and 3 sons. It wasn't hard to guess why he was so eager to marry Victoria off. This was the continent of martial resolve, where only those with high martial prowess were respected. And Victoria? She was merely a level 1 martial disciple. No wonder her father, Charles Harlow, was so desperate to send her away. Victoria, you've been causing trouble everywhere lately. Can't you let me have some peace for once? Charles Harlow began questioning her the moment she stepped into his room, not even waiting for her to stand properly. Victoria knew very well that all she needed to do now was go along with him. I haven't done anything. I've just been practicing martial arts at home, hoping to catch up with my sisters and brothers one day, Victoria replied, a bit confused. Practicing martial arts? Don't even mention cultivation in front of me. Don't you know your father is anxious to marry you off? Charles Harlow, seated on a luxurious armchair, spoke irritably. Of course, I know. It's because my martial arts skills are so poor that father holds such prejudice against me. Victoria's eyes began to glisten with unshed tears as she stammered. In truth, even she didn't understand why her eyes felt so stung, perhaps it was her subconscious speaking. It's not that I'm being unfair. You're all my children. But among my 5 children, think carefully, haven't you realized that you haven't even reached the level of a servant? Charles Harlow frowned. Victoria was speechless. She didn't even know how she ended up in this situation, so how could everything be blamed on her? Although she thought this way, Victoria only dared to mutter these words internally, not having the courage to argue with her father. In Harlow Fortress, her father, Charles Harlow, was akin to an emperor, no one dared to defy his orders. In fact, Victoria's mind was filled with subconscious memories of the real second daughter of the Harlow family. This made Victoria feel deeply unfortunate for the original second young lady. What Victoria found most unacceptable, what made her feel the deepest injustice and misfortune for the original second young lady, was the fact that her father had countless wives and concubines, while Victoria's mother was merely a concubine who never caught his attention. Thus, even though Victoria held the title of a young lady in the household, her status was quite ordinary. Apart from having a small private room and a few maids to serve her, her treatment was only slightly better than that of a servant. After Charles Harlow favored Victoria's mother briefly, he treated her as nothing more than an object, ignoring her completely. The Lord of Harlow Fortress was someone who valued sons over daughters, and Victoria's birth was a tragedy from the start. Over the years, Victoria and her mother lived in solitude together. While they didn't have to worry about food or shelter, the loneliness in their spirits was impossible to erase. Adding to this, Victoria lacked talent, with her martial cultivation progressing at a snail's pace, which caused her and her mother's status in Harlow Fortress to decline further. I called you here not for anything else but to discuss the family's upcoming assessment. You understand the consequences if you fail to pass, don't you? Charles Harlow's voice turned cold. Through the subconscious memories of the second young lady, Victoria already knew everything she needed to. Yes, I know. If I fail, I'll be erased from the family registry and sent to the mainland for training. The more Victoria spoke, the more frustrated she felt. What kind of ridiculous rule was this? Hearing this, Charles Harlow also felt guilty toward his daughter. From her childhood until now, he had never properly guided or educated her. Come here and take this, the Harlow family's heartfelt manual. In the next 5 days, you must try your best to cultivate. I don't want to hastily marry you off like this either. But if you don't marry, with your current level 1 martial disciple rank, you'll surely be cast out by the family. It's too late to say anything more now. Quickly take it and start cultivating. Hayes. Charles Harlow handed Victoria a manual. Victoria accepted it without a word and turned to leave her father's room. Watching Victoria's departing figure, Charles Harlow let out a long sigh. His daughter had been born into hardship. Now, he wished for nothing more than for her to successfully pass the upcoming assessment. Charles Harlow sank into deep thought. After leaving her father's hall, Victoria immediately encountered Leon Harlow, the cousin who had always captivated her heart. She knew that in 5 days, the family's assessment would take place, so she decided to seek guidance from her cousin, Leon Harlow. According to Leon, this assessment was for those under the age of 20 who had not yet reached the martial practitioner rank within the Harlow fortress. It was a major test of physical techniques. The content of the assessment was not fixed and changed every year. Everyone understood the consequences of failing to pass. Victoria was currently only a level 1 martial disciple, and breaking through to level 3 to become a martial practitioner within 5 days seemed nearly impossible. Unless she was a prodigy or encountered a miraculous opportunity, it was as unattainable as a madman's dream. Moreover, the leap from a level 1 martial disciple to a martial practitioner was a significant barrier. For a girl like Victoria, overcoming such a boundary was an immense challenge. Although Victoria did not hold much attachment to the Harlow fortress, she was reluctant to leave behind the comfortable life she had here. More importantly, Victoria had made up her mind, she was no longer the useless second young lady. From now on, she wanted to restore the honor of the second young lady, ensuring that no one dared to look down on her. She believed that as long as she worked hard, she would undoubtedly pass this assessment and hold her head high within the family. On the way, Victoria kept pleading with her cousin Leon Harlow for some guidance. However, to Leon Harlow, giving advice to a clueless level 1 martial artist was nothing more than a waste of time and effort. Hence, Leon Harlow paid no attention to Victoria, using the excuse of following the fortress master's orders to decline her request. Victoria thought to herself, what kind of cousin is this? He won't even help with such a small matter. I see it clearly now, men are all the same. Feeling dissatisfied, Victoria returned to her room. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye, neither too long nor too short. The annual assessment of Harlow Fortress was being prepared to take place at the vast training grounds of the Harlow family, now packed with people. Days earlier, Charles Harlow had ordered the disciples to meticulously decorate the training grounds. At this moment, Victoria was weaving through the crowd, curiously eyeing the exotic dishes on display. The entire venue was adorned with lights and flowers, making it look like a grand wedding for the second young lady. But as misfortune would have it, the second young lady was merely caught in the crossfire. The disciples of Harlow Fortress understood clearly that the lavish decorations were meant to emphasize the importance of the assessment. Seated at the central position in the east, a man clad in luxurious robes was idly playing with a small throwing knife, his gaze sharp and cold. This was none other than Charles Harlow, the fortress master of Harlow Fortress. Beside him sat his most favored third son, Lucas Harlow. One glance at Lucas was enough to tell he was an extraordinary talent. Ever since breaking through to the martial master realm, he had always stayed by Charles Harlow's side. At just 16 years old, Lucas Harlow was exceptionally gifted, having already reached the martial master level. According to reliable internal sources, he was a strong contender to become the next fortress master of Harlow Fortress. Elsewhere, Victoria and other disciples under the age of 20, many of whom she had never met, stood outside the training grounds, awaiting their final judgment. Every year, the examination was extremely strict and challenging, with more than half of the disciples being eliminated. Those who hadn't reached the martial practitioner realm and were disqualified were considered to have little to no value on the continent of martial resolve. Chapter 5, The Final Examination begins. Richie Hallow, you must give it your all. You absolutely have to pass this examination. While Victoria was still immersed in the lively atmosphere, she noticed her elder sister on the training ground cheering for Richie Hallow, the fifth son of the fortress master Harlow. Richie Hallow turned around, saw Sophia Harlow, his elder sister, encouraging him, and smiled as he said, "Sister, you should be cheering for our second sister instead. She's the one in the most danger. As for me passing or not, just watch and see, my strength will prove everything. Fifth brother, you shouldn't speak of second sister like that. What if she doesn't pass and has to travel across the continent? Could you bear that?" Sophia Harlow stood by the training ground, speaking with a hint of worry. In Harlow Fortress, according to the memories of that second young lady, Victoria knew that Sophia Harlow and Richie Hallow were the ones who cared about her the most. They always checked on her, and their personalities were quite similar. "Oh, do you think I'm that kind of person?" "Don't worry, sister. Second sister has always been lucky, this time won't be any exception," Richie Hallow replied with a smile. "Hayes." Sophia Harlow let out a sigh and said no more. Richie Hallow stepped forward, patted her on the shoulder, and reassured her, "Sister, don't worry." Hearing this, Sophia Harlow didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced toward their father's position and whispered, "Fifth brother, do you know who that celestial-looking woman sitting next to father is? Could she be father's new lover?" "Oh, a new lover? What are you talking about?" "I heard third brother say that she's the great fairy of the Grand Convergence Palace. Apparently, she's a good friend of father's and was invited here just to observe the assessment. You say their relationship isn't simple, and I think it's a bit ambiguous too. Hard to figure out." Richie Hallow spoke while propping his chin on his hand, gazing in the direction Sophia Harlow pointed. "Grand Convergence Palace is a famous sect, but I don't really know what they do," Sophia Harlow asked, puzzled. I'm not too sure about that either. I'll ask third brother later. The assessment is about to start, so I'll head to the training grounds to prepare." Richie Hallow shook his head and walked toward the training area. Sophia Harlow turned her gaze back to where the female fairy stood. She wore a flowing, wide-sleeved silk gown adorned with small turquoise ornaments, looking to be in her early 20s. Her beauty was overwhelming, making Sophia Harlow secretly uncomfortable. How could someone be this stunning? As Sophia Harlow stared at the fairy, the woman seemed to sense it and turned to look in her direction. With just an ordinary glance, Sophia Harlow felt her entire body freeze, as if encased in ice, unable to move even a finger. She was utterly terrified. The fairy appeared slightly surprised before letting out a soft sigh, her expression tinged with regret. At that moment, Sophia Harlow felt her body return to normal. Still shaken, she quickly wiped the cold sweat from her forehead with a handkerchief, avoiding eye contact with the fairy. This woman must have an incredibly high level of martial cultivation, otherwise, why would I feel this kind of fear, with chills running down my spine? Sophia Harlow thought to herself. Even when facing her father, a martial sovereign-level expert, she had never experienced such dread. For someone so young to possess cultivation far beyond her father's, just how powerful was she? The thought left Sophia Harlow deeply unsettled, and she hurriedly left the scene. "What's wrong, Fairy Catherine Frost?" Charles Harlow sensed an energy fluctuation from Catherine Frost and asked, thinking there might be an enemy nearby. "Nothing, just feeling a bit regretful," Catherine Frost replied calmly, then began to play with her nails. "Harlow, I truly admire you sorcerers. You can use magic to overwhelm enemies with grand spells, unlike us martial artists who have to rely on every punch and kick to get things done," Charles Harlow said with a hint of envy. Master Harlow, there's no need for envy. Martial arts and sorcery each have their own merits, don't they?" Catherine Frost responded with a smile. "Yes, that's true," Charles Harlow laughed heartily, brushing the topic aside, and turned his attention to the training ground. Catherine Frost let out a soft chuckle but said nothing more. Seeing that the time was nearing, Charles Harlow stood up and walked to the center of the training ground. "Everyone, quiet down for a moment. I hereby announce that the assessment officially begins." As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped back to his seat. Victoria no longer had the mood to enjoy the spectacle. After all, this event was closely tied to her future. She immediately felt a heavy pressure weighing on her. Looking around, she noticed an eccentric old man standing in the training ground. His attire was peculiar, and he held a large, round, transparent crystal orb that shimmered brilliantly. This crystal orb, according to the second young lady's memories, was something Victoria had some knowledge of. It was called the Soul Summoning Orb, a rare sacred artifact. By placing both hands on it and gripping it tightly, one could determine their current cultivation level. However, it could only measure realms below martial saint. As for the eccentric old man, he had a notable background as well. He was the sole sorcerer residing in Harlow Fortress. For this reason, Victoria's father greatly favored him. As long as his requests weren't excessive, they were always accommodated. From the second young lady's memories, Victoria also understood the value of sorcerers. In this continent, very few people had the qualifications to become sorcerers. Moreover, sorcerer training was thousands or even tens of thousands of times more arduous than martial arts training. This was why most people leaned towards cultivating martial arts. In an army, having the support of a sorcerer almost guaranteed victory in any battle. Thus, it was easy to understand why this eccentric old man was so arrogant. Cough, cough, let me tell you, this test is only the first step. Any disciple who passes this round must find an opponent among these participants and defeat them to be considered as having passed the examination. No more talking, let's begin. The eccentric old man cleared his throat and placed the soul-summoning orb onto a treasure box designed to hold the orb in place. This condition was indeed extremely harsh. No wonder Harlow Fortress had been able to thrive for so long. Their examination ensured the competency of the disciples from the Harlow family. The first one, please step forward, Richie Hallow, young master of the Hallow family. On the training ground, the eccentric old man glanced at the list in his hand and announced loudly. As soon as he finished speaking, Richie Hallow confidently strode into the training ground. His expression was relaxed, his eyes gleaming with determination, clearly brimming with confidence about the test. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he began to slow down his steps. He even started greeting the disciples below. It seemed as though he hadn't noticed the weapon rack placed on the training ground, and he walked straight into it. Crash, crash. The weapon rack toppled over, scattering swords, knives, spears, and other weapons all over the ground. Ha ha. Immediately, laughter erupted from the disciples below. Cough, cough. The eccentric old man coughed a few times to suppress the laughter. After all, Richie was the fifth son of the fortress master, offending him could lead to serious consequences. Charles Harlow covered his face with his hand. The scene had utterly embarrassed him. In his heart, he thought, this brat, so embarrassing, so embarrassing. Unable to bear watching any longer, Charles lowered his head, pretending to close his eyes and meditate. Richie Hallow's face turned bright red with humiliation. Awkwardly, he got up, dusted himself off, and pretended as if nothing had happened. With an air of composure, he walked toward the soul-summoning orb. Adjusting his posture, he gripped the orb firmly with both hands. Chapter 6, Dangerous Examination. Kang. The soul-summoning orb let out a soft chime, radiating a purple glow. Seeing this, Richie Hallow sighed in relief, revealing his signature white teeth and raised a few fingers in a victory gesture. The soul-summoning orb is known to display 7 colors, representing 7 realms: white for martial novice, blue for martial disciple, purple for martial practitioner, yellow for martial master, deep blue for martial lord, orange for martial saint, and green for martial deity. However, for some unknown reason, this particular soul-summoning orb could only display 6 colors, excluding the realm of martial deity. Congratulations to young Master Hallow for passing the preliminary test, the old instructor in the training arena announced loudly. Next, more than 10 other young boys and girls entered the training arena for their assessment. Among them, the oldest was only 16 years old, while the youngest was just an 8-year-old participant. Unfortunately, not many managed to pass the preliminary round. After all, reaching the martial practitioner realm is no easy feat, especially considering their young ages. Next, Miss Victoria Harlow, please step forward for the preliminary test. The old instructor once again reluctantly announced the name of the next candidate. Second sister, you got this. Richie Hallow, having passed his own test, gave a thumbs up toward Victoria, cheering her on. Victoria nodded slightly and, under the watchful eyes of the other disciples, stepped into the training arena. On the spectators' stand, Catherine Frost suddenly widened her eyes, her gaze filled with confusion and curiosity. With a hint of intrigue, she observed Victoria's appearance before subtly asking Charles Harlow, "This young lady also bears the Harlow name. She must be your daughter, correct?" Charles Harlow was slightly surprised. Catherine Frost's words were a bit unexpected for him. However, he didn't hide anything and nodded in response, "That's right. Fairy Catherine Frost is indeed perceptive. That is Hallow's second sister. Unfortunately, her aptitude is really poor, and she refuses to make progress. I had originally planned to marry her off, but alas, it seems that plan is ruined." After speaking, seeing that Fairy Catherine Frost didn't seem to react, he asked, "I heard that Fairy Catherine Frost didn't just come to observe the assessment this time but also intends to select a disciple." "Yes, that's correct. But I haven't found anyone suitable yet, though it should be soon," Catherine Frost replied while carefully observing every movement on the training ground. Charles Harlow looked at Catherine Frost with some surprise, unable to understand the meaning behind her words. On the other side, Victoria gracefully stepped onto the training ground, channeling all her internal energy into her martial body technique. She gently grasped the soul-summoning orb with both hands. A miraculous moment occurred as the soul-summoning orb emitted a purple light, astonishing everyone below. Unbelievable, she managed to ascend to the martial artist realm. Richie Hallow shook his head and chuckled to himself. However, just as everyone was marveling, the light of the soul-summoning orb suddenly reverted to the blue hue of the martial disciple realm. Witnessing this, everyone present was dumbfounded. Could there be an issue with the soul-summoning orb? The eccentric old man stared intently at his precious orb, racking his brain but unable to comprehend. "What does this mean?" someone asked in confusion, feeling indignant on Victoria's behalf. "Could the soul-summoning orb be broken?" another disciple exclaimed in surprise, gazing at the orb on the training ground, trying to figure out the cause. The soul-summoning orb was supposed to be a sacred artifact, incapable of malfunctioning. If it wasn't an issue with the orb, then it must surely be due to the individual. Everyone discussed for a while, then collectively turned their gaze toward Charles Harlow, who was staying late to work overtime, seeking a fair judgment. Unable to hold back anymore, Charles Harlow abruptly stood up. With a swift whoosh, he appeared in the middle of the training ground. He picked up the soul-summoning orb, examined it carefully for a moment, and then tested it with his inner energy. As expected, the light remained the blue hue of the martial sovereign realm. He confirmed that the orb had no issues. Charles Harlow lowered his head in thought for a moment but still couldn't pinpoint the problem. He glanced at Fairy Catherine Frost, who was sitting on a chair, and awkwardly asked, "Miss Frost, where do you think the issue lies?" Catherine Frost brushed her slightly wrinkled sleeve and coldly replied, "Why not test the person?" Then, she stood up, flew several meters away, and disappeared into the sky. Charles Harlow muttered to himself, "Test the person." After pondering for a while, he finally understood. He turned toward Victoria, who was hiding to the side, and immediately rushed over, grabbing her wrist. Moments later, a loud slap drew everyone's attention. Victoria was struck by Charles Harlow, falling to the ground, her mind dizzy and disoriented. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and glared resentfully at her father. "Speak. Why did you cheat?" Charles Harlow, veins bulging, clenched his fists and stared intently at Victoria. The disciples outside the training ground immediately began murmuring, "What? Cheating? That's not right at all. After all, she's the second young lady. One must be honest." Their chatter only fueled Charles Harlow's anger. "Cheating? Father, I don't understand anything." Victoria clutched her slapped face and looked at Charles Harlow. "Fine, let me make it clearer for you. Where did you get the spirit core pill?" Charles Harlow pointed at Victoria. Victoria thought to herself, "This is bad. So, the pill cousin Leon Harlow gave me was a spirit core pill. He only said that consuming it would help me pass the assessment. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. He helped me, I can't betray him. Gritting her teeth, Victoria decided to bear the consequences alone. This happened when I ran away from the engagement. I met an old man who gave it to me, saying it could temporarily boost my cultivation level, Victoria slowly explained. Good, so you admit it. Charles Harlow said no more and turned to the eccentric old man nearby. Elder Hong, in this situation, do you think she can pass the assessment? The matters of the Harlow family are your own. It wouldn't be appropriate for an outsider like me to intervene, Elder Hong replied slyly with a faint smile, shutting down Charles Harlow with one sentence. Charles Harlow wanted to find a solution through Elder Hong. After all, Victoria was still his daughter, but the reputation of the Harlow family had to be preserved. Narrowing his eyes, Charles Harlow addressed Elder Hong. According to the rules, anyone who fails the assessment is deemed unqualified. Someone who cheats like her will, from now on, be expelled from Harlow Fortress and have no further ties to the Harlow family. But Old Hong clearly didn't know how to announce this news. Do I need to repeat myself? Charles Harlow said coldly. Yes, understood. Old Hong knew that, after all, this was Harlow Fortress. Charles Harlow's words were orders, and of course, he didn't dare to argue. He immediately announced the punishment decision. Upon hearing this news, among the crowd, some felt regret, some sympathized, some believed it was well-deserved, others gloated, and some shook their heads and sighed. The myriad facets of life were vividly displayed here. Victoria was momentarily stunned. As someone involved, she naturally knew why this happened. Even though she understood the root cause of the issue, she now felt that none of it mattered anymore. So this is what they call family love. Ha, how ridiculous. Face is always more important than family. At this moment, Victoria felt utterly disappointed. Chapter 7, The Snow Bear Enchantress. Second sister is really about to be expelled from Harlow Fortress? Richie Hallow asked with some surprise. Perhaps she should have been expelled from Harlow Fortress a long time ago, don't you think? A girl like her, what use does she have staying here in Harlow Fortress? Lucas Hallow smugly patted Richie Hallow on the shoulder and casually replied. Only 5 more days until she has to leave, how pitiful, Sophia Hallow said as she appeared out of nowhere, shaking her head in regret. That's right. How about we find some time to see her off? After all, we are siblings, Richie Hallow suggested. Good idea. We should definitely go to see her off, Lucas Hallow said with a sinister smile. After that, the day-long assessment assembly came to an end. Fortunately, Richie Hallow had passed this round of assessments. Of course, there was still another screening round to follow, and any disciples who failed to meet the requirements would have to leave Harlow Fortress within 10 days. But why did Victoria have to leave in just 5 days? There was no other way. Her disgraceful act of cheating was something Charles Hallow, who tolerated no imperfection, could not accept. This was clearly a case of killing the chicken to scare the monkey, which is why Victoria was ordered to leave Harlow Fortress in 5 days. After leaving the training grounds, Victoria did not return to her room but instead went straight to her mother's residence. She knew very well that the one thing this second lady cherished most in the world was her mother. Now, fulfilling filial duties on her behalf was the least she could do. However, before stepping into the room, Victoria hesitated for a moment, feeling too ashamed to face her mother. The matter of her cheating was already known throughout the entire fortress. Is that you, Victoria? Come in, my child, her mother called out, perhaps having heard the sound of movement. The gentle voice of her mother stirred Victoria's heart. In her previous world, she had never experienced such maternal affection. At this moment, countless words surged within her, and she threw herself into her mother's arms, unable to hold back her tears. Victoria, don't cry, don't cry. I know how much pain you've endured. Who says we mother and daughter aren't destined for hardship? This is nothing to fret over, her mother comforted her. Mother, I can't accept this. I refuse to. Victoria protested, lifting her head to look at her mother with indignation. It's just a cheating incident in the examination, isn't it? What's the big deal? Besides, I had no idea about it. Her mother consoled her gently. Mother, you already knew about it? Victoria asked, slightly taken aback. I raised you, my dear. This matter has already spread throughout the town. I've witnessed all your efforts, her mother said softly, wiping away the tears from the corners of Victoria's eyes. But mother, this will make it harder for you to hold your head high, Victoria explained hastily. Victoria, what's done is done. Why dwell on it? Ever since I came to Harlow Fortress, when have I ever been treated with respect? Her mother tenderly stroked Victoria's delicate hands and reassured her, it's just leaving home, that's all. I know my daughter will shine brightly in the future. Mother, I promise I will succeed. I won't let anyone look down on us, Victoria said, her heart aching as she gazed at her mother's weary eyes, her voice choked with emotion. Mother, I have to go now. I'll come to visit you again in a few days. Taking her mother's advice, Victoria felt much calmer. She bid her mother goodbye and returned to her residence. However, as soon as she stepped through the door, a loud bang echoed behind her, the door slammed shut. Startled, Victoria froze. Could something unclean have followed her inside? She instinctively turned to look. Logically speaking, the weather was clear today, with no wind to speak of. Moreover, the door to her room opened outward, even if there had been wind, it would have blown the door open, not shut. You don't need to keep looking. Just as Victoria found the situation strange, a voice rang out from inside the room. Who's there? Don't scare me, or I'll spray you with a mouthful of salty soda water. Victoria exclaimed, startled, her eyes darting around the room. Someone had appeared in her space without her noticing, which left her stunned. It seems your combat skills are still quite lacking. You're not exactly young anymore, yet I can sense an extraordinary and untapped energy within you, just waiting to be awakened, the stranger said. You're the woman from the stands. Victoria finally got a clear look at the person. It was none other than the alluring woman who had been seated next to her father. She silently wondered why this person had sought her out. Judging by the intruder's abilities, sneaking into her room without a trace, this woman was clearly highly skilled. Victoria grew more cautious. Do you have any idea how lucky you are to have caught my attention? Catherine Frost stated bluntly, wasting no time on pleasantries. Lucky? What are you talking about? Victoria asked, puzzled. Ha! Young lady, finding you is fortunate for me, but it's also a blessing for you. Have you heard of the Grand Convergence Palace? Catherine Frost asked coldly. Grand Convergence Palace? I've heard a little about it. Are you saying you're from there? Victoria asked, astonished as she stared at Catherine Frost. You'll learn more about that later, Catherine said with a faint smile. Let me introduce myself first. I am a sorceress, the master of the water element within the 5 elements at the Grand Convergence Palace. My name is Catherine Frost. Hearing this, Victoria stared blankly at the woman before her. I'm in a hurry, so I won't waste words. Let me be direct. I've left the palace this time to track down a woman, a member of our Grand Convergence Palace, who violated palace rules by leaving without permission. I must bring her back to face judgment. I heard she passed through your Harlow Fortress, so I stopped by to investigate. Unexpectedly, I found you instead. You have great potential. So, what do you say? Would you like to return to the Grand Convergence Palace with me and become my disciple? Catherine Frost asked without beating around the bush. Victoria thought to herself, could the woman she's after be Iris Storm? It must be. After all, I'm about to be expelled from Harlow Fortress anyway, and I have nowhere else to go. Maybe I should go with her and train for a while. I still don't fully understand what a sorceress is, Victoria said, feigning confusion. But from Catherine Frost's tone, she could tell that meeting her was no small gain for the sorceress. What's that? You don't even know what a sorcerer is? Catherine Frost asked irritably, while Victoria once again shook her head in confusion. Humph, you're truly naive, knowing nothing at all, Catherine Frost said with dissatisfaction, giving Victoria a once-over. After pondering briefly, she pulled out a small book from her sleeve, tossed it in front of Victoria, and added, "This book, Elemental Principles, you should read it first. However, I advise you not to tell anyone about the two of us being alone together. Doing so might cause you unnecessary trouble. If word gets out, well, you understand." Victoria glanced at Catherine Frost's eerie smile and let out a faint, "Aha." Taking the small book, she casually flipped through it and found it filled with text. Truthfully, she hated reading books, but in front of others, she was too embarrassed to admit it. So, she held on to it without a word. Chapter 8, Elemental Principles. Alright, I'll go ahead first. If I stay out too late, that old man Charles Harlow might get suspicious. I'll come find you before you leave. As soon as Catherine Frost finished speaking, she waved her sleeve, and the temperature in the room dropped instantly. She slightly arched her back, and a pair of pure white icy wings sprouted. With a few flaps, she flew swiftly out of the window. The scene left Victoria wide-eyed in astonishment. Another person with wings who could fly. Could it be that the mysterious man who brought her to this world had some connection to the Grand Convergence Palace? It seemed inevitable that she had to visit the Grand Convergence Palace, Victoria thought to herself. In truth, she had seen many people capable of flying in this world. After all, masters of the martial sovereign realm, like her father, could soar through the skies. But people with wings? She had only seen that twice, and as for someone flying as fast as this, it was her first time. Victoria rubbed her eyes a few times. If she wasn't still holding the book Elemental Principles in her hands, she might have thought she was dreaming. After shaking off her surprise, Victoria opened the small book Catherine Frost had given her. The content of the book wasn't extensive and was divided into two parts. The introduction explained what magic was and what a magician was. Magic, according to the continent of martial resolve, was the act of utilizing one's latent abilities and advancing through cultivation to enhance one's level. Typically, Victoria practiced a common type of magic on the continent, which involved strengthening a magician's power to elevate their rank. The process of advancing a magician's rank involved step-by-step cultivation of techniques and mental methods. As for magicians, the most basic prerequisite was to possess magical abilities. With magical abilities, one could sense the elements existing on the continent and gradually cultivate through systematic training. The magicians are divided into four major realms, namely, the art refining stage, the art condensing stage, the art core stage, and the art mastery stage. After each advancement in realm, the body and corresponding elements undergo changes, which means the ability to learn more advanced mental techniques becomes possible. In fact, Elemental Principles only explains the most basic concepts, therefore, the majority of its content focuses on the art refining stage. The art condensing stage, art core stage, and art mastery stage are only briefly touched upon, merely mentioning that with each advancement in realm, the body and personal elemental power are significantly enhanced. For magicians in the art refining stage, as introduced in this book, the so-called refining of art primarily has two layers of meaning. First is cultivating one's own magical abilities. Second is honing the ability to sense elements. When magical abilities and elemental perception reach a certain level, specifically, the peak of the late art refining stage, only then can one use a certain secret technique to advance to the art condensing stage. As for elements, they depend on each individual's inherent magical potential and their connection to the continent. Thus, different magicians will have corresponding unique elements. The most common elements on the continent are natural ones such as metal, wood, water, fire, earth, light, darkness, wind, rain, and lightning. Rarely do spatial-type elements appear. It can be said that the variety is endless, with each individual being unique. However, in summary, only by strongly sensing elements can one firmly establish themselves on this continent. Unusual transformations are very rare, and mutated elements are incredibly diverse. Upon reading this, Victoria had gained a basic understanding of magicians. The introductory section about magicians was still quite long, mainly providing a simple explanation of the fundamental uses of elements corresponding to magicians. The more Victoria read, the more intrigued she became. Her initial disappointment completely dissipated. She then turned to the second section of the book, which primarily discussed methods for cultivating magical abilities. Magical energy is the fundamental source of power for sorcerers. Similar to the body techniques Victoria is practicing, magical energy belongs to the realm of spiritual strength and resides in the brain. Through magical energy, sorcerers can sense the elemental forces tied to them within the continent and use these forces to cultivate. The book particularly emphasizes one critical point: if magical energy is not strong enough, sensing the elements can have adverse effects. Not only will the sorcerer fail to merge with the elements, but they may also suffer a backlash, potentially leading to their demise and resulting in mutual destruction. Additionally, when a sorcerer first senses and merges with an element, they establish an elemental pact with their corresponding element. Once this pact is formed or successfully signed, there is no room for regret. If the element is stolen by some mysterious force, the sorcerer will become an ordinary person, losing the ability to sense elements. Conversely, if the sorcerer dies, the elemental force will also cease to exist, leaving behind only elemental essence. If the person who killed the sorcerer possesses an element compatible with the deceased sorcerers, they can absorb the elemental essence to accelerate their cultivation. Could it be that my slow progress in body techniques is because the sorcerer has been waiting for me? Victoria couldn't help but feel a surge of joy in her heart. Over the next few days, Victoria locked herself in her room, dedicating herself to cultivating her magical energy. After finishing elemental principles, Victoria gained significant insights about sorcerers. She finally understood why she had always felt so spiritually perceptive. It turned out her soul's strength was exceptionally powerful. Victoria had never known she possessed a special soul force, also known as an innate ability. Her talent grew with age and was accidentally triggered during her daily martial arts training, allowing her to reach the second level of soul refinement. According to a small manuscript, once one attains the third level of soul refinement, they can visit the elemental hall of the Grand Convergence Palace to sense their aligned element. Victoria secretly rejoiced, realizing that the second young lady was not entirely useless. She felt as though her springtime had finally arrived. Over the past few days, she had been tirelessly practicing her soul ability. Using some basic techniques mentioned in the book, she even managed to control objects to move simply through the air. This newfound skill delighted her, and her once lazy habits took a playful turn. Victoria began making food fly directly into her mouth. Victoria felt a sense of grievance on behalf of the late second young lady, as she finally understood why the latter had progressed so slowly in martial arts training. It turned out that soul force and martial energy were two distinct types of power that cancelled each other out if cultivated simultaneously. Because Victoria's soul force was naturally strong, her martial arts techniques had always failed to condense properly. Upon discovering this reason, Victoria was not discouraged but instead felt a surge of excitement. After all, the second young lady's body was not entirely without merit. Victoria silently vowed to help the young lady complete her unfinished path. 5 days passed quickly, and Victoria had already reached the peak of the second level of soul refinement, just one step away from breaking through to the third level. Currently, she was deeply intrigued by the book Elemental Principles. Over the past few days, she had memorized its contents. Now, the person Victoria most wished to meet was Catherine Frost, as the book provided only a rudimentary understanding of sorcery, far from satisfying her growing curiosity. However, Catherine Frost did not appear as promised, leaving Victoria frustrated. Outside of her training, she spent time visiting her mother. Of course, she refrained from mentioning anything about her sorcery abilities. It wasn't that she didn't want to share, but rather that her current level was still too limited. If she could successfully sense an element, Victoria was certain she would proudly tell her mother everything. Chapter 9, The Day of Departure. Early Monday morning, Victoria noticed that Catherine Frost did not appear, so she packed her simple belongings and left Harlow Fortress. Only her mother and elder sister came to see her off, there was no one else. Apart from the clothes on her back and a small amount of travel expenses, Victoria took nothing from the Harlow family. She had already conveyed everything she needed to say to her mother days prior. Now, seeing the ones who came to bid farewell, Victoria said nothing more. She simply gazed deeply at her aging mother and elder sister, the two people who had always treated her well since childhood. Victoria walked down a path whose destination was unknown, her lonely silhouette causing Sophia Harlow beside her to break into tears. "Second sister, don't go. Why don't you return and beg father instead?" Sophia Harlow shouted loudly as she saw Victoria walking further away. Of course, Victoria heard her, but she did not turn back. She resolutely continued forward. Watching Victoria's figure gradually disappear, Sophia Harlow could only silently pray in her heart, "Second sister, stay safe." Harlow Fortress was located in River Zhang Town, its influence dominating the small town. Victoria, knowing she had left the Harlow family, naturally decided not to remain in this place and headed in the opposite direction. As she traveled, the sky gradually darkened, and a vast mountain range loomed ahead. Contemplating her situation, Victoria, being a lone woman, decided to spend the night in the forested mountains. However, she dared not venture too deep into the woods, as many high-level spirit beasts resided there. Although she had reached the peak of martial practitioner and the second level of refining arts, facing ferocious spirit beasts still posed some danger. After finding a relatively safe forest area, Victoria began focusing on her cultivation. She aimed to quickly break through to the third level of refining arts, ensuring she would have a foothold when she eventually arrived at Grand Convergence Palace. Yet, just as she entered a meditative state, Victoria suddenly sensed something unusual, causing her to frown. What are those two doing here? After pondering for a moment, Victoria decisively climbed a tall tree to observe the distance. "Cousin, are you sure she went this way?" Leon Harlow's voice echoed from afar. "Brother Leon, don't worry. You know second sister's personality well, don't you? With her stubborn nature, there's no way she'll stay in River Zhang Town," Lucas Harlow analyzed. You're right, absolutely right," Leon Harlow nodded. Then suddenly snapped to attention and said, "In that case, let's hurry and find her." Hearing their conversation below, Victoria sighed helplessly. From their words, she deduced that the two were tracking her. At this moment, Victoria silently observed their discussion from atop a tree, with no intention of revealing herself. Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow exchanged a few more words without noticing anything unusual, then stopped. Lucas Harlow shook his head, looking around, and asked first, "Strange, given second sister's speed, we should have caught up to her by now. Why can't we see her anywhere?" "Maybe she didn't head this way," Leon Harlow guessed. "Impossible," Lucas Harlow affirmed. Victoria let out a cold laugh from the tree. Her mood had been sour, but seeing how anxious they were to find her, she thought there might be something important going on. Moreover, observing their flustered demeanor, she felt a mischievous urge to toy with them a bit. With that thought, the energy within Victoria surged, her spiritual power enveloping the small stones on the ground, sending them flying swiftly toward Lucas Harlow. Lucas Harlow, being a martial artist, sensed the sound of wind behind him and quickly dodged the incoming stones. Smack! Immediately after, Leon Harlow was struck in the face. Leon Harlow's cousin wasn't a martial artist or a sorcerer but possessed a brilliant mind and intellect, making him one of the rare scholars on the continent of martial resolve. Scholars do not cultivate physically but rely on their profound knowledge, often accompanied by skilled protectors. The two had been searching with Lucas Harlow in the lead and Leon Harlow following behind. When the stones flew toward them, Lucas Harlow heard the sound of wind and dodged, while Leon Harlow also sensed it and tried to evade. However, Lucas Harlow's movement blocked him, resulting in Leon being hit on the head by the stones. Who the hell threw that? Leon Harlow rubbed his head where he'd been hit, angrily shouting into the dense forest. His usual dignified scholarly demeanor was nowhere to be seen. As soon as he finished speaking, another stone came hurtling toward him. Damn it! Leon Harlow swiftly sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the attack. Just as his right foot moved to the side, he froze in place. Who the hell left their crap lying around like this? Leon Harlow stepped on a pile of dung, completely losing his dignified image as a master, and couldn't help but curse loudly. Victoria glanced down and, sure enough, there was a pile of dung under Leon Harlow's foot, seemingly the creation of some spirit beast. She tried to suppress her laughter but suddenly had an idea. Controlling the stone from earlier, she aimed it at Leon Harlow and launched it. At present, Victoria's cultivation was only at the second level, so she could only control one object for an attack. Move quickly. Leon Harlow noticed the stone flying toward him and reacted swiftly, pulling Lucas Harlow aside to dodge. However, the stone was too fast, and just as Leon Harlow managed to run a short distance, it caught up with him. Thud! A soft sound echoed as the stone struck Leon Harlow's back. Fortunately, the two of them were physically strong. Being hit by a small stone didn't cause any pain, but the unusual nature of the stones left them both startled. Victoria had only intended to tease the two of them a little. Based on her judgment, with their physical strength and reaction speed, they shouldn't have been hit by the stone. Yet, out of 3 attacks, aside from the second one that Leon Harlow dodged, the other 2 strikes hit their mark. This left Victoria quite satisfied with her spellcasting skills. In truth, Victoria didn't know that Leon Harlow's cousin wasn't someone who practiced martial body techniques. As for Lucas Harlow, although he had reached the level of a martial master, he was usually lazy and rarely trained, resulting in slower reaction times. If they had been diligent martial practitioners, it wouldn't have been so easy for Victoria's controlled stones to hit them. At this moment, after continuously teasing the two, Victoria found the game growing dull. Feeling her mood improve slightly, she retracted the stones she had been controlling and quietly observed the two from a large tree nearby. Chapter 10, Ethan Blackwood. What's going on? After realizing no stones were flying toward them, Leon Harlow asked in confusion. An enemy, Lucas Harlow replied, scanning the surroundings cautiously, then whispered to Leon Harlow. Could it be someone from the Blackwood family? Leon Harlow guessed. Very likely. Perhaps it's that Ethan Blackwood sneaking around, Lucas Harlow speculated after a moment of thought. Leon Harlow nodded but suddenly felt nauseous, choosing to remain silent while carefully observing the surroundings. Seeing the two acting this way, Victoria chuckled quietly to herself, thinking there was bound to be some drama worth watching. She leisurely reclined on a tree branch, preparing to enjoy the show. The Blackwood family Leon Harlow mentioned was something Victoria now fully understood, as she had completely merged with the consciousness of the second young lady. The Blackwood family, much like the Harlow family, held a notable status in River Street Town, located several dozen miles from Riverjong Town. The two families, belonging to different towns, should have had no major conflicts. However, Both were striving to nurture their younger generations, leading to an unspoken rivalry over time. Within the Blackwood family, there was a youth around Leon Harlow's age named Ethan Blackwood. He was infamous throughout the town for his lecherous behavior, an arrogant second-generation heir who bullied the weak and committed all sorts of misdeeds. At present, he had cultivated to the peak of the martial master stage, earning some recognition within a 100-mile radius. Lucas Harlow was even more familiar with Ethan Blackwood, having spent nearly 2 years growing up in the shadow of his name. Now, just hearing the name Ethan Blackwood made him feel sick to his stomach. "Someone's coming," Leon Harlow suddenly said. "It seems to be Ethan Blackwood," Lucas Harlow squinted into the distance and said. "Attacked us sneakily and now pretending to be noble, huh?" Leon Harlow grumbled angrily, rubbing the small bump on his head. Victoria, being a sorceress, naturally sensed the presence of someone approaching before her two friends did. That was also why she paused her teasing of them. Now, seeing the figure drawing closer, she glanced briefly and noticed that the person had a slightly plump build. It was indeed Ethan Blackwood. At this moment, Ethan Blackwood, with a nervous expression, darted back and forth in the forest before finally hiding behind a large tree. "Stop hiding, I've seen you for a while now," Lucas Harlow shouted loudly. Ethan Blackwood was clearly startled by the shout. After a moment of silence, he stepped out from behind the tree, glancing at Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow. He recognized the two but was surprised to encounter them here, so he asked in astonishment, "What are you two doing here?" "Keep pretending, go on, keep pretending," Leon Harlow snapped angrily. Ethan Blackwood blinked, his face showing confusion as he pondered Leon's words. "I'm talking to you, still playing dumb?" Leon Harlow grew even angrier when Ethan didn't respond. "So, you're saying you all really know nothing?" Ethan Blackwood's expression suddenly turned icy. "Since you already know, go die." Ethan Blackwood spat coldly. He swiftly drew a blade from his side and slashed with a sharp whoosh toward Lucas Harlow. Lucas, having been on guard, immediately rolled to evade the attack as the blade narrowly missed him. Furious at the ambush and the audacity of using a weapon, Leon Harlow, who often dismissed himself as a mere, useless intellectual, quickly pulled out an intricately designed dagger from his side and tossed it to Lucas. "Catch this, cousin. This is a treasure," Leon shouted as he threw the dagger. Catching the weapon mid-air, Lucas asked, "What about you, cousin?" Leon smirked devilishly. "Don't worry about me. Just focus on the fight. I trust in Brother Swan's teachings. I'll live forever, protected by golden armor. I'll be fine." Reassured, Lucas grasped the dagger firmly and charged forward. In an instant, the two began clashing fiercely, while Leon stood to the side, cheering them on as if he were merely enjoying the spectacle. The sound of blades clashing rang out continuously. Perched on a tree, Victoria observed everything clearly. Her brows furrowed as she thought to herself, Ethan Blackwood must have some secret that's been exposed. That's why he's so desperate, attacking Leon and Lucas so viciously. Otherwise, their meeting would have amounted to just a few taunts and a light sparring match. But now, Ethan's strikes were deadly, clearly aiming to kill both Lucas and Leon in a short time. Realizing this, Victoria seized the opportunity while the three were engaged in combat. She quietly slid down from the tree, using the shadows of the foliage to conceal herself as she carefully moved toward the direction Ethan had come from. When she reached the large tree Ethan had hidden behind earlier, she discovered a young woman lying there, her torn clothes in disarray. A sharp dagger was lodged in her chest. Judging by the scene, it was clear the girl had been assaulted and then murdered. Her body was still warm, she had died not long ago. Fortunately, Victoria had trained in martial arts and body techniques since childhood. From the tender age of 6, she had grown accustomed to the sight of death. Even so, stumbling upon a corpse at twilight sent a chill down her spine. She instinctively took 2 or 3 steps back, shuddering. After taking a deep breath to steady herself, she mustered her courage and cautiously approached the body. Upon closer inspection, Victoria immediately recognized the identity of the girl. A cold shiver ran down her back. The young woman before her was none other than Diana Grace, the daughter of Butler Grace from Harlow Fortress. Victoria had met Diana Grace a few times before. Although the Harlow family was prominent, she could still recognize someone like Butler Grace. But why was Diana Grace dead? Recalling Ethan Blackwood's sneaky demeanor, Victoria could piece together part of the story. No wonder Ethan Blackwood seemed bulky when she first saw him. It turned out he was carrying Diana Grace. Diana Grace had been raped and murdered. Even though Victoria no longer had any ties to the Harlow family, witnessing such a beastly act from Ethan Blackwood infuriated her as a fellow woman. Her anger boiled over. Without hesitation, she stepped out from behind the large tree and shouted at the three people fighting, "All of you, stop this instant." Chapter 11, Never Underestimate a Sorcerer. Three people were fiercely fighting when suddenly a loud shout startled them. They instinctively turned to look in Victoria's direction. As Ethan Blackwood saw Victoria stepping out from behind a large tree, his heart tensed up, and his already ferocious expression grew even more menacing. In a cold voice, he asked, "Who are you?" Victoria, being relatively unknown in Harlow Fortress, was not someone Ethan Blackwood paid attention to. Though he had encountered her a few times, he had nearly forgotten her existence. Therefore, he failed to recognize her. However, after sensing the faint aura of energy emanating from Victoria, he gradually relaxed. Just an ordinary martial artist, nothing more ordinary than this, and to top it off, a woman. She wasn't worth his concern at all. "I ask you, did you assault and murder Diana Grace?" Victoria questioned coldly. "So what?" Ethan Blackwood replied disdainfully, his tone clearly admitting to the crime. "Diana Grace? Killed? Or raped and killed?" Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow looked at each other in confusion, unable to react in time. "So, you know everything? Then blame yourselves for meddling." Ethan Blackwood sneered coldly, swinging his knife toward Victoria. "Be careful, cousin," Leon Harlow shouted in warning. Usually, Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow enjoyed playing around with Victoria and had no conflicts with her. Seeing Ethan Blackwood charging at Victoria with a knife, Leon Harlow feared his younger cousin might be cut in half. Ethan Blackwood was truly outrageous, showing no regard for beauty or grace. Leon quickly exchanged a glance with Lucas Harlow, signaling him. Lucas understood immediately, maneuvering behind Ethan Blackwood and attempting to disrupt his attack with a dagger. However, Ethan Blackwood's skill level was far superior to Lucas Harlow's, and his speed was unmatched. Moreover, he was already close to Victoria, just a few steps away. Without hesitation, he swung his knife downward. Though Victoria's martial prowess was insignificant in Ethan Blackwood's eyes, he briefly considered her potential. Still, since she had uncovered his secret, she had to be eliminated to avoid future trouble. What a pity for such breathtaking beauty. As the blade descended, Victoria was struck with terror. In this life-threatening moment, she hastily channeled her soul energy, concentrating all her power on the opponent's blade. Ethan Blackwood, mid-swing, felt his right hand falter slightly, as if an unseen force had enveloped him. The strike veered off course, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. Taking advantage of the misdirected strike, Victoria quickly dodged and moved to Leon Harlow's side. Seeing this, Leon immediately drew his treasured violet gleam dagger. As the violet gleam dagger appeared, Lucas Harlow, who had been chasing after Ethan Blackwood, suddenly halted, his eyes lighting up. Victoria exclaimed, "Indeed, what a fine weapon." Thanks to this pause, Ethan Blackwood managed to secure a safe position behind. He then swung his blade once more, channeling fiery energy as he launched another attack on Victoria. Seeing his cousin about to fall into a disadvantageous position, Leon Harlow quickly shouted, "Victoria, catch this," and tossed the violet gleam dagger to her. Victoria, quick to seize the moment, caught the violet gleam dagger and once again used her soul power to manipulate the weapon, causing Ethan Blackwood's right hand to freeze momentarily. Taking advantage of this opening, the violet gleam dagger lunged forward with force. Ethan Blackwood was alarmed, his expression shifting drastically. Fortunately, his reflexes were sharp, and he leaned back just in time to evade the strike of the radiant blade. At that moment, Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow charged forward, unleashing a fierce assault on Ethan Blackwood. The Harlow family held a strong belief: if anyone dared to bully a member of their family, they would never let that person go unpunished. Thus, after learning about Diana Grace's tragic fate, assaulted and murdered, Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow were filled with rage. Someone had dared to kill one of their own. Except for the brief moment when the violet gleam dagger had paused earlier, their attacks were now overwhelmingly aggressive. Among the three, two had already reached the martial master realm, making it nearly impossible for Victoria, at the martial practitioner level, to intervene directly in the battle. However, Victoria was, after all, a sorceress, possessing unique abilities that martial artists did not have. Spotting an opportunity, Victoria used her soul power to control the blade in Ethan Blackwood's hand. Ethan Blackwood was utterly frustrated. The blade was clearly aimed at his opponent's waist, but a sudden tremor in his hand caused it to strike the leg instead. As a result, after exchanging 7 or 8 rounds, both Ethan Blackwood's thigh and arm had been hit twice by Lucas Harlow's sword. Just as they were about to capture Ethan Blackwood, Victoria suddenly tensed up and urgently warned, "Be careful, an expert is approaching, hurry up." Lucas Harlow and Leon Harlow, trusting Victoria's keen instincts, immediately hesitated for a brief moment. Lucas Harlow then swung his dagger even faster. The moment Victoria finished speaking, a streak of brilliant red light flashed through the forest. In an instant, a middle-aged man clad in a crimson robe appeared before Victoria. With just a wave of his hand, he effortlessly neutralized Lucas Harlow's attack. Marcus Blackwood. Seeing the newcomer, Victoria and her companions froze in shock. In contrast, Ethan Blackwood's face lit up with joy as he looked at the man. This was none other than Marcus Blackwood, the head of the Blackwood family, who had reached the realm of condensed precision. "Ethan, how could it take you so long to handle these 3 youngsters?" Marcus Blackwood, his back to Victoria, spoke to Ethan Blackwood. "Father, this girl is a bit peculiar," Ethan Blackwood said, glancing at Victoria before addressing Marcus Blackwood. "Oh." Marcus Blackwood turned to look at Victoria and asked, "What's peculiar about her?" "She seems to be a sorceress," Ethan Blackwood said. "Huh? Isn't she that useless second daughter? How did she become a sorceress?" Marcus Blackwood, recognizing Victoria, exclaimed in slight astonishment upon hearing she might be a sorceress. "She just controlled the weapon in my hand several times," Ethan Blackwood explained. "Ethan, do you like this girl?" Marcus Blackwood asked with a sly smile. "Father, although this girl is a bit feisty, I actually like that kind of personality. If I could marry her as a concubine, it would be perfect," Ethan Blackwood replied, looking at Victoria, who appeared pure and graceful in the wind. "Daydreaming in broad daylight. I'd rather marry a spirit beast than someone as vile as you." Victoria, hearing the words of the father and son, glared angrily, clenching her fists tightly. "In that case, there's no reason to let her live." "Humph, a sorceress, originally, I intended to recruit you." "Who would have thought the Harlow family harbored a sorceress?" Marcus Blackwood sneered coldly. On the other side, Victoria and her companions, upon realizing Marcus Blackwood had arrived, knew they couldn't escape and decisively stood their ground. In the Harlow family, there was only death in battle, no cowards begging for mercy, not even the women. As for Victoria, it went without saying. Though her cultivation level was low, she was still the dignified second daughter of Harlow Fortress. Faced with such circumstances, she would never become a deserter. Chapter 12, Life and Death. What should we do now? Lucas Harlow asked in a low voice. We're out of options. This guy clearly wants to silence us for good. We just have to accept our bad luck, Leon Harlow said, his face pale and his tone despondent. So, you understand your situation. Alright then, I'll count to 10. If you can leave this forest by then, I'll spare your lives, Marcus Blackwood said, looking at the three of them. Ridiculous. Bullying the weak because you're stronger? Old and shameless. No one from the Harlow family is a coward, Lucas Harlow retorted coldly. Really? Marcus Blackwood, of course, understood that Lucas Harlow was mocking the Blackwood family as cowards. Being insulted by a mere child enraged him. Without hesitation, he swung his hand, delivering a powerful strike straight at Lucas Harlow's head. A martial grandmaster, a level above a martial master, had speed and strength that Lucas Harlow, as a martial master, couldn't possibly counter. A dull thud echoed, followed by Lucas Harlow's body being thrown backward. Mid-air, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. In Victoria's eyes, the entire forest seemed to be drenched in the crimson hue of the blood-stained sunset. Leon Harlow rushed forward, trying to catch Lucas Harlow mid-air, but he was too slow. Struck by a martial grandmaster, Lucas Harlow's fall was inevitable. By the time Lucas hit the ground, Leon could only grasp at empty air. Victoria looked toward Lucas Harlow and saw that he had already fallen unconscious. Taking a direct hit from a martial grandmaster, it seemed survival was slim. I'll risk it all with you. Leon Harlow, seeing Lucas Harlow unconscious, immediately picked up the short dagger lying on the ground and charged fiercely at Marcus Blackwood. He and Lucas Harlow had always shared a deep bond, being members of the Harlow family. Beyond their familial ties as cousins, the two were close friends. At this moment, seeing Lucas Harlow collapse to the ground, the hatred in Leon Harlow's heart erupted like a volcano. Moreover, both were young and impulsive by nature. Ignoring the fact that Marcus Blackwood was far superior in skill and disregarding that he himself was not a martial artist but a scholar, Leon recklessly launched an attack. Seeing Leon Harlow rushing at him with the dagger, Marcus Blackwood merely sneered. With a flick of his left hand, he struck the blade mid-air. Whoosh! The dagger quivered violently, causing Leon Harlow's entire arm to tremble. His grip loosened involuntarily, and the dagger fell to the ground. Not bad, young man. Your courage is commendable, Marcus Blackwood sneered. As soon as he finished speaking, he swung his palm toward Leon Harlow's chest. Ugh! Leon Harlow was sent flying, blood spurting from his mouth. His body wobbled through the air before crashing into a large tree with a loud thud, then slumping to the ground. Little sorceress, it seems you are wiser, choosing not to resist. After dealing with Leon Harlow, Marcus Blackwood's gaze shifted to Victoria. Victoria remained calm, her eyes fixed on Marcus Blackwood. Kneel down, bow your head 100 times for me, then serve my father and me to our satisfaction, and I'll spare you, Ethan Blackwood sneered coldly, standing to the side. All of this was caused by Victoria, and the grudge he bore was something he couldn't swallow. Victoria merely smirked faintly, saying nothing. Marcus Blackwood, on the other hand, looked at Victoria with amusement, curious to see how she would react, so he remained silent as well. What's the matter? Playing deaf, are you? Ethan Blackwood said icily. Victoria continued to feign indifference, as though she hadn't heard him, but quietly secured the violet gleam dagger behind her back, simultaneously channeling all her soul energy into the blade. At the moment, she had no way to confront a martial sovereign like him head-on, but Victoria thought to herself that, as someone who had transmigrated to this world, if she could kill Ethan Blackwood before dying, it would at least serve as revenge for herself, her two friends, and Diana Grace. It would make her journey here worthwhile. With that thought, Victoria silently prepared the violet gleam dagger, waiting for the perfect opportunity to deliver a fatal strike to Ethan Blackwood. At this moment, Ethan Blackwood was still lost in his delusions, imagining Victoria becoming his slave after his training. He envisioned her adopting all sorts of submissive postures, and the thought of her bowing before him filled him with anticipation, as he waited foolishly for her response. "Giving you a chance, and you don't even appreciate it? Don't blame me for being ruthless," then, Ethan Blackwood said, his expression darkening when Victoria didn't plead for mercy as he had expected. He was visibly displeased. This was precisely the opportunity Victoria had been waiting for. As Ethan Blackwood spoke, the violet gleam dagger, controlled by her soul energy, shot toward him without hesitation. Ethan Blackwood could only watch as a streak of purple light flashed before his eyes. By the time he reacted, it was too late. Even so, he tried to dodge to the side, but the sound of thud, thud echoed as the dagger embedded itself deeply into his right chest. The violet gleam dagger had an incredibly strong penetrating power, slicing through his body as effortlessly as cutting tofu. Ethan Blackwood let out a scream, the pain so intense that he wanted to writhe on the ground. Fortunately, he dodged just in time, and the blade missed any vital spots. However, the agony was unavoidable. Marcus Blackwood never imagined his son would be attacked right before his eyes. Seeing the violet gleam dagger embedded in his son's chest, Marcus was overcome with worry. Without a second thought, he rushed forward to catch Ethan as he collapsed to the ground, urgently asking, "Ethan, are you all right?" "Father, kill her for me." Ethan Blackwood gritted his teeth and growled. "Don't worry, she won't escape. I'll capture her alive, and later, you can torment her as much as you want, make her life worse than death," Marcus Blackwood replied, glancing coldly at Victoria. To him, she was nothing more than an insignificant insect, and he wasn't concerned about her escaping. Victoria, unfazed by her failed strike, didn't lose her composure. She was well aware of the vast difference in strength between herself and her opponents. Quickly, she manipulated the violet gleam dagger to withdraw from Ethan Blackwood's chest. This action caused blood to gush from Ethan's chest like a fountain. "You filthy wench, you're courting death." Marcus Blackwood, enraged by Victoria's boldness, immediately lashed out, his hand radiating fiery energy as he struck toward her. Victoria, however, wore a satisfied smile. Observing Ethan Blackwood losing so much blood, she knew that even if he survived, he wouldn't recover fully. To her, dragging one of them down with her before her own demise was already a victory. Chapter 13, The Shocking Words of Iris Storm. This strike from Marcus Blackwood carried the fiery attribute of his essence, moving at an incredibly fast speed. Just as it was about to kill the young sorcerer, he suddenly felt his hand gripped tightly, forcing the blazing palm he had unleashed to be withdrawn. "Humph, bullying the weak, do you find that glorious?" At that moment, a cold voice echoed from within the forest. Marcus Blackwood was slightly startled. Even with his martial sovereign realm, he could sense that the newcomer was not someone easy to deal with. He immediately heightened his focus, carefully observing the surroundings. As the voice faded, the person in question did not remain hidden in the forest. Victoria barely caught a glimpse before a familiar yet distant figure in a purple robe appeared before her, a young woman with her face veiled. The woman in purple first cautiously glanced at Victoria, then shifted her gaze to Marcus Blackwood. "Are you from the Grand Convergence Palace?" Marcus Blackwood froze for a moment before asking the veiled woman. "This person is wanted by our Grand Convergence Palace. If you know what's best for you, leave now," the woman in purple stated curtly, getting straight to the point. "My son was ambushed by her. This debt cannot go unsettled." Marcus Blackwood roared in fury. "That's your business, it has nothing to do with our Grand Convergence Palace," the woman in the purple robe replied indifferently. Marcus Blackwood stood frozen in place, caught in a dilemma. He was well aware of the Grand Convergence Palace, a formidable sect teeming with powerful sorcerers. The Blackwood family could not afford to offend them. However, the thought of abandoning his revenge for his son just because of a single statement from the other party left him feeling deeply aggrieved. "I have no desire to waste words. Handle this yourself," the woman in purple said curtly, then turned to Victoria. "Victoria, let's go." Hearing the exchange, Victoria realized the woman was from the Grand Convergence Palace. Someone had come to rescue her, and she was overjoyed. Yet, she couldn't understand how this veiled woman knew her name. Without hesitation, she followed the woman in purple, step by step, as they left. Leaving? It won't be that easy. Marcus Blackwood, noticing his son Ethan Blackwood unconscious, was consumed with rage. He struck out with his palm toward Victoria in a fit of fury. At that moment, the woman in purple suddenly moved. She raised her finger toward the sky, and the heavens shifted. Dark clouds gathered thickly, and bolts of lightning crackled and descended from above. Just as Marcus Blackwood launched his strike at Victoria, countless lightning bolts ferociously struck him instead. Crack! Marcus Blackwood's entire body was hit by the lightning, trembling and paralyzed. Resorting to sneak attacks? "You're far too inexperienced," the woman in purple sneered coldly. Streams of lightning, like long ropes, wrapped tightly around Marcus Blackwood, immobilizing him. Marcus's face turned pale. It was evident that his opponent had subdued him with a single move. He felt utterly powerless. Despite his reputation as a martial master in River Street Town, he was effortlessly restrained by this monster. His heart filled with unwillingness, and though he wanted to scream to vent his frustration, no words would come out. Victoria saw that the girl in the purple robe was about the same age as Catherine Frost, yet she defeated her opponent with just one move, leaving Victoria utterly astonished. Is this the true power of a sorcerer? Thinking of this, her admiration for sorcerers grew even deeper. But what surprised Victoria even more was the sorcerer's technique. It was simply too dazzling. "I intended to leave you a way out, but you failed to cherish it," the girl in the purple robe said coldly, as lightning tightly bound her opponent. The rain fell like blades, and Marcus Blackwood's face turned crimson from suffocation. Blood seeped from his body where the lightning coiled around him, yet despite the torment, he remained incredibly resilient, not letting out a single sound. Your reinforcements have arrived. Consider yourself lucky," the girl in the purple robe suddenly remarked, her tone shifting. She muttered something under her breath, then frowned as she gazed into the distance. Soon after, she withdrew the dense lightning elements from the sky, which instantly cleared up, restoring its bright and sunny appearance. She called out to Victoria, then quickly dashed toward the forested mountains. Victoria hesitated for a moment, then turned to look at Leon Harlow and Lucas Harlow, who were lying on the ground. "If you're not leaving, I won't bother with you," the girl in the purple robe said indifferently, clearly aware of the two people on the ground but showing no concern. Gritting her teeth, Victoria followed the girl in the purple robe without saying a word, swiftly leaving the scene. Not long after the purple-robed girl and Victoria departed, a streak of fiery red appeared in the sky. Moments later, an elderly face emerged amid the forest. The old man hurried to Marcus Blackwood and Ethan Blackwood's side upon his arrival. Seeing their injuries, he furiously demanded, "Who did this?" "The people of the Grand Convergence Palace," Marcus Blackwood replied calmly, his injuries not too severe, as he recognized the newcomer. "Grand Convergence Palace?" The old man was momentarily stunned, simultaneously realizing that dealing with this force would be extremely challenging. His expression darkened. "The Harlow family has a girl with the talent to become a sorceress," Marcus Blackwood briefly explained again. "We'll discuss it after we return," the old man decisively stated. Meanwhile, on the other side, under the guidance of the girl in the purple robe, Victoria followed her deeper into the forest. By now, the sky had gradually darkened. The girl in the purple robe stopped beside a large rock and said, this place should be temporarily safe. Who was that earlier? Victoria, having seen the person effortlessly subdue a martial master, yet immediately retreat upon sensing their presence, grew curious and asked. Just a mere martial saint. Fighting him would take too much time, the woman in the purple robe replied lazily, leaning against the large rock with narrowed eyes. Victoria was taken aback. To dismiss someone as a martial saint simply because it would be time-consuming to fight them, her words left Victoria skeptical. However, from the faint disdain in her tone, Victoria couldn't help but feel astonished. A martial saint was nearly at the pinnacle of the continent of martial resolve, yet this woman referred to them as just a mere martial saint. I won't bother introducing myself, you probably already know me. We've met before. In fact, I am the lightning element instructor from Grand Convergence Palace, the woman in the purple robe said, leaning against the large rock. She pulled down her face covering and spoke lazily. Iris Storm. Why is it you? Are you really that powerful? Victoria was stunned once more. Chapter 14, Teleportation Talisman. Victoria thought Catherine Frost had sent someone to pick her up and take her back to the Grand Convergence Palace. Unexpectedly, she encountered Iris Storm, the wielder of the lightning element, leaving her unsure of how to react. Victoria, you don't need to concern yourself with my matters. This time, I'm out for my own reasons. So, what do you say? Interested in becoming my disciple? Iris Storm looked at Victoria, her eyes filled with anticipation. Victoria was momentarily at a loss for words and could only gaze up at the sky. Hurry up and answer, I'm not patient, Iris Storm frowned, urging her when she saw Victoria's silence. Iris Storm, the thing is, before you came, Master Snow had already approached me, and I've agreed to become her disciple, Victoria confessed honestly. Catherine Frost? Iris Storm frowned again, staying silent for a moment before speaking. You should know that the techniques of water element disciples are nothing impressive. Compared to us lightning element users, it's like night and day. You should think carefully. But I've already promised Master Snow. Victoria, being a principled person, stuck to her decision, even though Iris Storm's offer sounded incredibly tempting. This matter is not difficult at all. The one who brought you to the Grand Convergence Palace was me. If not, why would I have taken you there in the first place? When the time comes, just let that martial sovereign chase after you, Iris Storm said, half coaxing, half threatening. Iris Storm, don't play like that, Victoria said, sounding annoyed. I'm going to take a nap. Think it through carefully, Iris Storm said, leaning back against a large rock. In no time, she had drifted off to sleep. Victoria looked helplessly at Iris Storm, unsure of what to say. Being able to sleep soundly in this situation was truly extraordinary. However, just as Iris Storm stretched lazily, she suddenly opened her eyes and gazed deeply into the shadowy forest. What's going on? Victoria murmured, releasing her spiritual power to scan the surroundings but sensing nothing unusual. It seemed Iris Storm had already discerned the identity of the approaching individual. She closed her eyes again and continued to nap against the rock. Master Storm, you really are too relaxed, Victoria muttered. Seeing Iris Storm's nonchalant attitude, Victoria assumed there was nothing unusual in the forest. At that moment, a voice echoed from afar. Listening closely, she realized it was Catherine Frost. You're just in time. Whose disciple is this young girl supposed to be? Iris Storm asked lazily, not even bothering to open her eyes. Sister Storm, if you've taken an interest in my disciple, then I'll yield her to you, Catherine Frost replied, emerging from the forest. Really? Iris Storm opened her eyes, looking slightly surprised. We are fellow disciples, after all. What's the harm in letting you have one disciple? Besides, this time I recruited quite a number of disciples during my trip outside the palace, unlike Senior Sister Storm, who spends her days dozing off. I heard that this time, senior sister Storm left the palace just to crash a wedding and search for her true love, Catherine Frost said with a laugh. How many disciples did you recruit? Iris Storm, unfazed by Catherine Frost's sharp words, simply asked. Not many, just a dozen or so, Catherine Frost replied with a grin. Iris Storm remained silent, as she had nothing to say in response. This time, leaving the Grand Convergence Palace had already violated the palace rules. Clearly, Catherine Frost's recruitment of over a dozen disciples gave her plenty of room to mock Iris. I have a teleportation talisman here. Let's use it to send Miss Victoria back to the palace first, Catherine Frost said after a moment of silence, pulling out a snow-white talisman from her chest and addressing Iris Storm. No need to trouble yourself, Iris Storm replied. She also retrieved a talisman from her chest, but hers was purple. Without even glancing at Catherine, she immediately pressed the talisman against Victoria's back. Victoria felt a mysterious power envelop her, and her body emitted a faint purple light. In the next moment, her vision blurred, and a sharp pain shot through her head. When she regained her senses, her surroundings had completely changed. With a thud, Victoria landed on the ground, and the purple light surrounding her vanished without a trace. Welcome to the Grand Convergence Palace. As Victoria was still marveling at the sudden change in her environment, a voice rang out beside her. She turned to see a young man, about 20 years old, with a muscular build and a warm smile, looking at her. Who are you? Victoria asked. I am Nicholas Moore, a disciple of the Grand Convergence Palace, responsible for welcoming new disciples here, the young man explained. Hearing the young man introduce himself, Victoria couldn't help but chuckle. Nicholas Moore, what a funny name, she thought. However, she quickly stifled her laughter and began to look around. Although the sky was already dimming, the surroundings emitted a soft, gentle light. Gazing into the distance, she saw forests, towering mountains, small streams, and poetic meadows, all of which gave Victoria an incredibly refreshing feeling. Little junior sister, just follow this small path straight ahead. Once you get there, go inside for the preliminary test, Nicholas Moore said as he pointed into the distance. Victoria nodded, bid farewell to Nicholas Moore, and headed in the direction he had indicated. After walking for a while, a row of flat-roofed houses appeared before her. Among them stood a 3-story building, towering in the center. According to Nicholas Moore, this 3-story building was the place for the examination. Hearing the word examination, Victoria couldn't help but recall the annual assessment of her family. It was thanks to that assessment that she had the chance to meet Catherine Frost and learn about the unique profession of being a sorcerer. Standing in front of the large house, Victoria's heart was filled with unease and excitement at this moment. Come in, a calm yet commanding voice echoed eerily from within the house. Victoria couldn't help but feel startled. This person's perception was incredibly sharp. Gradually approaching the large house, she noticed a square-shaped door emitting a blue light appearing before her eyes. Taking a deep breath, Victoria stepped inside. Inside the spacious room, everything was arranged in an ancient style. A man dressed in black, with his hands clasped behind his back, stood in front of a wide table, facing a transparent round window. As if aware of Victoria's arrival, he casually asked, "Your name is Victoria, isn't it?" "Yes, Senior," Victoria replied, her tone neither arrogant nor servile. "On the table, there is a book and a token. Take them and keep them safe. Then, take the token to the space on the rooftop of house number 9527 to begin your training. Come see me in 10 days, the man in black instructed. After speaking, he fell silent, gazing out of the window without uttering another word. Chapter 15, Soul Relic. Victoria softly responded, her eyes catching sight of a not-too-thick book and a small wooden card on the wooden table. She picked both items up. First, she looked at the title on the book's cover and saw 4 large words, Elemental Principles, with 2 smaller words underneath, supplementary edition. Feeling a slight joy, she carefully put the book away. Then, she examined the wooden card, which had the symbol, 9527, engraved on it. Thinking it might be some kind of key, she also tucked the wooden card away before saying, "Thank you, Senior." The man in black did not reply, his eyes still gazing out the window as if admiring the scenery or lost in thought. Seeing that he was not inclined to talk, Victoria felt a bit disappointed and walked toward the door without hesitation. However, just as she was about to step out of the room, she heard the man in black ask, "What, do you have nothing to ask me?" Not at the moment." Victoria stopped in her tracks, turned around, and looked at the man's back, answering without much thought. "Nothing?" The man in black sneered. "Senior, I do have many questions about sorcery that I would like to ask, but I feel it might be a bit inappropriate to trouble you with them." Victoria replied without hesitation. "Very well, you're an honest child," the man in black remarked approvingly. After pondering for a moment, he continued, "But I have a question I want to ask you." "Please go ahead, Senior." "I will answer to the best of my knowledge without hiding anything," Victoria responded promptly, trying to guess what he might ask. Judging by his appearance, he was clearly a sorcerer of a very high level, a master of his craft. Could someone of his caliber possibly have a question for her? She found it hard to believe. The man in black casually asked, "All right then, let me ask you this, where did the soul relic on you come from?" Though his tone seemed indifferent, there was a hint of excitement in his voice. "Soul relic? What soul relic?" Victoria asked in confusion. The man in black slowly turned around, first glancing at Victoria's face before fixing his gaze on the violet gleam dagger at her waist, his eyes unblinking. Victoria shuddered slightly, a wave of fear washing over her heart. Could it be that the aurora dagger her cousin had gifted her was actually a treasure? Despite her astonishment, she had already prepared a response. She spoke earnestly, "Oh, Senior, are you referring to this aurora dagger? This dagger was a gift from my cousin. If you desire it, I humbly offer it to you." Without hesitation, Victoria extended both hands, presenting the violet gleam dagger. The man in black gave Victoria an appraising look. Observing her calm demeanor and generous attitude, devoid of any resentment, he remained silent for a moment before taking the violet gleam dagger. From the moment she faced him, Victoria's first impression was that this man had the appearance of a ruthless killer. Moreover, as his gaze swept over her, she felt as though he could see right through her, sending a chill down her spine. When she noticed his greedy stare fixated on the violet gleam dagger, she quickly deduced in her mind, "It seems this dagger is indeed a treasure." Somehow, this man must have known about it, and his earlier demeanor clearly revealed his intent to claim it for himself. Unable to resist the temptation, the man in black casually stowed the dagger away and remarked, "You are quite filial. Naturally, I won't treat you unfairly. Besides, with your current level of cultivation, having a soul relic like this would only go to waste." With that, he rummaged through his belongings, producing a golden talisman in his hand. He continued, "Take this talisman. Once your cultivation improves, you can summon it using your spell energy. With this, ordinary alchemy stage sorcerers won't pose a threat to you. However, this talisman can only be used 3 times. Unless you're in danger, it's best not to waste it." Victoria accepted the talisman with both hands, expressing her gratitude earnestly. The man gave a slight nod, pondered for a moment, then fixed his gaze on Victoria and asked, "Besides you and your cousin, does anyone else know about this soul relic?" "Before arriving at the Grand Convergence Palace, I was pursued by the head of the Blackwood family and his son. I was forced to use the soul relic a few times to defend myself," Victoria explained calmly. "Good, at least you're honest." The man nodded indifferently after hearing her response. Victoria suddenly felt a chill run through her heart. In that fleeting moment, she sensed as though she had stepped into an extremely dangerous place. For some reason, she always felt that the man in black exuded an indescribable killing intent, making it hard for her to breathe. Regarding the matter of the soul relic, you must not mention it to anyone else. If you do, I won't be pleased. The man in black's cold, piercing gaze locked onto Victoria's face. Startled and terrified, Victoria quickly replied, I understand, Senior. I will remember your instructions. Good. Now, leave. The man in black relaxed slightly and waved his hand. Also, my name is Victor Knight. Once you return, investigate the general situation of the Grand Convergence Palace and make time to cultivate your energy techniques to the 3rd level. Solidify your foundation. Understood, Victoria answered. Seeing that the man in black had nothing more to say, she uneasily left the room. This place, and especially the man in black, Victor Knight, were things Victoria truly hoped never to encounter again. But there was no other way. 10 days later, she would still have to return. Deep down, Victoria resolved that once she understood everything about the Grand Convergence Palace and her own strength had grown, she would reclaim the violet gleam dagger. As she exited, Victoria listened for a moment before heading toward her flat-roofed room, number 9527. Walking along, Victoria glanced at the numbers on the doors of the flat-roofed rooms. When she reached the door of room 9526, right next to hers, she suddenly noticed its large blue door wide open. At the same moment, her vision blurred, and a fiery red silhouette accompanied by a strong fragrance rushed toward her. In the next instant, a soft body fell into her embrace. I'm so scared. The way you're holding me so tightly, could it be that you want to? Along with a faintly sweet scent, Victoria froze for a moment and realized that an extraordinarily beautiful young woman, as if descended from the heavens, had fallen into her arms. Taking a closer look, her mind became a whirl of confusion, and a strange, indescribable feeling stirred within her. Hee, you're so naughty. The young woman's flawless face blushed, and her delicate hand lightly brushed against Victoria's nose, her expression glowing even more radiantly like the morning sun. Victoria stood dumbfounded. Out of kindness, she gently helped the girl up and quickly let go, her face filled with confusion as she said, I'm sorry, miss. I'm not that kind of person. If you're interested in romance between women, you've definitely got the wrong person, I don't play that game. No, that's not it. Romance between women? What even is that? How could I? What? What did you just say? The stunning young woman hastily waved her soft hands, her cheeks flushing an even deeper shade of red. Huh? Victoria was stunned, unable to grasp the true meaning behind the other person's words. After all, she was a proper and upright person, completely uninvolved with such things. Chapter 16, The Pure Yuri. The stunning young woman smiled softly and replied in a coquettish tone, You don't need to explain anymore, my lady. If you also want to try, I'll serve you tonight, alright? Alright. Back then, sleeping on my mother's arm was so comfortable. I wonder if sleeping on your arm would feel the same. Victoria teased playfully. The stunning young woman was at a loss for words. So it turned out the other party wanted to bond with her just to use her arm as a pillow. Hey, who are you? How dare you touch my summon? At that moment, a melodious voice echoed. Victoria turned her head to look and saw, standing outside room 9526, a curvaceous young woman. Though she was incredibly beautiful, she exuded a cold and unapproachable aura. Victoria snapped out of her daze and awkwardly smiled, Senior sister, my name is Victoria. Victoria? I don't know you. Tell me, who is your master? The cold senior sister stared at Victoria, her eyes revealing a hint of hostility. Master? She's. Victoria scratched her head, momentarily forgetting Iris Storm's name. You can't even clearly explain who your teacher is, so what are you doing here with me? Senior sister Lydia Icy frowned and commanded the stunningly beautiful young woman, Ruby, she's yours now. Take good care of her, alright? As soon as senior sister Lydia Icy finished speaking, Ruby, with her fairy-like beauty, lunged toward Victoria. Her seductive red lips parted slightly, as if intending to kiss Victoria. "What are you doing? What are you doing? I already said I'm a proper person, I don't play Yuri," Victoria exclaimed in a panic. The delicate jade-like hands of the stunning young woman roamed over Victoria, making her squirm and laugh uncontrollably. Yet, Victoria couldn't help but think this girl was utterly perverse. She just wanted to escape quickly and vomit somewhere alone. At that moment, a soft thud was heard, and a wooden token fell from Victoria's person onto the ground. Seeing the wooden token, senior sister Lydia Icy froze for a moment before launching a blue flame at the dazzling Ruby. In an instant, the stunning beauty's body transformed into a streak of blue light and disappeared. At the same time, Victoria fully regained her clarity after the daze she had just experienced. "You're new here, why didn't you say so earlier?" the senior sister with a frosty expression asked. At this moment, Victoria's mind had completely cleared up. She suddenly realized that the cold senior sister in front of her was a summoner who had undergone elemental mutation. It was highly likely that the stunning Ruby was something she had summoned. Thinking of this, Victoria felt a surge of anger and glared at the senior sister. "I'm asking you, don't play death." The senior sister's beautiful eyes showed no warmth as she coldly said, "If I hadn't held back just now, you might have, I might have turned into a lily, is that it? You're just a neurotic pervert," Victoria retorted with a cold face. "Think whatever you want." The senior sister shot Victoria a sidelong glance before moving away. Watching her disdainful expression, Victoria couldn't help but feel a surge of resentment in her heart. Both were women, yet the difference between them was so vast. Naturally, this only deepened Victoria's desire to become a sorcerer, especially one with the ability to summon mutated entities. Taking a deep breath, Victoria couldn't help but recall Ruby's face and actions, which made her feel nauseous. She shook her head vigorously, trying to calm herself, and muttered, calm down, that thing is just a summoned monster." Shaking her head once more to dispel these distracting thoughts, Victoria picked up the token on the ground and walked toward her room, number 9526. As the token emitted a faint blue light, a large blue door suddenly appeared in front of the room and slowly opened. The originally windowless room now mysteriously displayed 9 round, transparent windows as the blue door materialized. Stepping into the room, Victoria glanced around. From the outside, the room appeared small, but inside, it was remarkably spacious, complete with a modest lounge and an almost oval-shaped grand hall. Victoria observed the grand hall's ancient style, noticing that the light primarily came from candles. Even though it was already night, the space was as bright as day. She couldn't fathom what material these candles were made of. Victoria had no mind to admire the room's decor any further. She immediately ran into the lounge, sat down, pulled out the Heavenly Element Codex, supplementary volume, and immersed herself in reading. After skimming through the book, Victoria discovered that this small volume only elaborated on a few sections compared to the one Catherine Frost had given her. Although not extensive, it still deepened her understanding of sorcery. Victoria recalled the scene of the youth summoning at the door earlier. This book also contained a few lines introducing it, more than 200 words, at least. The book read, Variant Summoner Sorceress, Female Chapter. Summoners are born from elemental mutations, and each summoner can summon a unique life-bound familiar. Primarily used for enchantment, most familiars summoned by women possess mesmerizing and alluring appearances. These familiars are extraordinarily challenging to deal with. At best, they can momentarily daze opponents, and at worst, they can drive them insane, turning them into fools. If enchanted, one may become a lifelong slave to the female summoner's familiar, forever unable to break free. Therefore, when encountering a female summoner's familiar, one must remain extremely cautious. Clearing one's mind of distractions is the key to victory. After finishing the reading, Victoria still felt confused. She was no longer young, and she had some understanding of these matters. In her heart, she thought, that was truly dangerous earlier, I almost fell for the trick of the female summoner and her summoned creature. It seems I'll need to be more cautious in the future. Victoria carefully reviewed each basic effect and attack skill of the summoned creatures detailed in the book and gained a general understanding. Feeling a surge of excitement, she speculated to herself, the sorcerer profession is indeed diverse and incredibly powerful. I wonder which branch of sorcery I'll end up mastering. There's no time to waste, I must quickly study the sorcery techniques and advance my skills to the 3rd level. With that thought, Victoria resumed practicing the sorcery techniques following the Heavenly Element Codex, supplementary volume. Time flew by, and 3 hours later, Victoria scratched her head in frustration, feeling irritated. According to the book, beginners practicing sorcery techniques should be able to master a skill called inner sight within just 1 hour. This skill allows the practitioner to examine the internal state of their body. Once the inner sight skill is learned, progressing to develop sorcery techniques would not be far off. Typically, individuals with average aptitude require 10 hours of training, while those with exceptional talent need only 2 hours to cultivate sorcery techniques. Victoria had already achieved these milestones in the past. However, at that time, she had only casually enhanced her sorcery abilities without any serious training, so she was unaware of skills like inner sight. Chapter 17, Cultivating the 3rd Level. During her recent cultivation process, Victoria had also mastered the skill of inner vision. However, what frustrated her was that her cultivation level in the 3rd stage of the art refining realm still could not break through. At this moment, what worried Victoria the most was the need to quickly advance her skill cultivation to the 3rd stage so she could soon determine what type of sorcerer she was. Currently, she had reached the peak of the 2nd stage of the art refining realm and had coincidentally encountered a bottleneck. Victoria unconsciously recalled her time cultivating martial body techniques, during which she had also stagnated for many years. Fortunately, her efforts over those years were not in vain, and she had finally broken through to the martial practitioner level just a few days ago. Could I be repeating the same mistake as when I cultivated martial body techniques? Victoria pondered for a moment before shaking her head firmly. Her gaze became resolute as she silently vowed, I refuse to believe it. If others take 2 hours, I'll take 30. Even if I have to work 10 or 100 times harder than others, I will definitely cultivate my skills to the 3rd stage. With this determination, Victoria tirelessly devoted herself to cultivation day and night. Luckily, the food and supplies in her flat-roofed room were abundant, saving her a considerable amount of time. Thus, 3 days passed quickly. This can't be right. I've spent 3 days, yet I still haven't reached the 3rd stage of the art refining realm, Victoria muttered, feeling disheartened. 3 days had gone by, and she remained stuck at the peak of the 2nd stage. It seems I truly have terrible aptitude, Victoria sighed, shaking her head in disappointment. All right, I'll cultivate for 1 more day. If it still doesn't work, then I have no other choice, Victoria said with a sigh, calming her mind to continue her training. On the 4th day, as dusk approached and Victoria's cultivation had pushed her to the brink of spitting blood, she suddenly discovered through her inner vision that a small, needle-thin stream of azure energy was slowly condensing within her body. Moreover, it was growing larger by the moment, clearly signifying she had reached the 3rd stage. Ha ha! I've finally succeeded! Victoria exclaimed, finally breaking into a smile. After countless failures and efforts, Victoria deeply cherished the hard-earned achievement of reaching the 3rd level of alchemy arts. Sensing the state of her magical energy, a fleeting smile appeared on Victoria's face, but her expression soon turned serious. She knew that although she had reached the 3rd level, she still needed time to stabilize it. If the 3rd level magical energy wasn't fully consolidated and she forced herself to sense the elements, the energy might dissipate on its own. At that point, she would have to start training again from the 2nd level. 6 more days passed, and Victoria discovered that the magical energy within her had grown to the size of an apple seed. Only then did she smile. Just as described in Elemental Principles, Continuation, magical energy reaching the size of an apple seed marked the completion of the final consolidation. It could be said that the third level of alchemy arts was equivalent to the fourth level of martial disciple in physical martial arts training. Advancing from the third to the fourth level in both disciplines was a critical juncture. Only by overcoming this bottleneck could future training progress more smoothly. Victoria knew that her 10-day agreement with Sir Victor Knight was approaching. Fortunately, she had managed to reach the third level of alchemy arts in time and completed the final consolidation. This represented a significant step forward in her journey as a sorcerer. On the morning of the 10th day, just after waking up and completing her morning routine, Victoria heard a knock at the door. Opening the large blue door of her flat-roofed room, Victoria was momentarily stunned. The visitor was none other than the cold and distant summoner from the neighboring room. The aloof senior sister glanced at Victoria expressionlessly, scrutinizing her from head to toe before asking, "Have you reached the third level of magical energy?" Victoria nodded, thinking to herself, "Please, for the love of everything, don't turn this into a Yuri situation. I can't handle it." The cold senior sister said indifferently, "If that's the case, then head to Master Knight's place immediately." Victoria nodded again without saying a word. The senior sister, cold and seemingly disdainful, avoided speaking to her and showed no respect. She glared fiercely at Victoria before retreating to her flat-roofed room, slamming the large blue door shut behind her. Victoria sighed, realizing she dared not provoke this person for now. If she were to be enticed again by her summoned creature, it would end badly. Thinking about Ruby, Victoria still felt slightly nauseous. Although she didn't yet fully understand the senior sister's background, her instincts told her the woman wasn't someone good. Thus, Victoria quickly headed toward Victor Knight's flat-roofed room. On the way, Victoria was surprised to find many others emerging from the previously quiet flat-roofed rooms. Like her, they were also heading toward the tallest flat-roofed room. It made sense. Victoria had been training in her own flat-roofed space for days and was completely unaware of outside events. It seemed the Grand Convergence Palace had recently recruited quite a few disciples. "Hey, sister, where are you from?" Just as Victoria was pondering whether these people were newcomers or already magicians, a voice called out beside her. "Continent of martial resolve," Victoria replied curtly, glancing at the speaker. She still remembered senior sister Lydia Icy's words, so she wasn't in a particularly good mood. "You're funny. This is the continent of martial resolve," the other person laughed, unfazed by Victoria's tone, and introduced herself. "I'm Evelyn Carter, from River Zhang Town. What about you?" "My name is Victoria Harlow, also from River Zhang Town." Hearing that the other person was also from River Zhang Town, Victoria felt a little more at ease. "Are you from the Harlow family?" Evelyn Carter asked in surprise. Victoria shook her head. The Harlow family? She had long ceased to be part of the Harlow family. Evelyn Carter still seemed puzzled. People with the surname Harlow in River Zhang Town were almost always part of the Harlow family. Not wanting to linger on the topic, Evelyn changed the subject and asked, "Have you trained your magical abilities to the third level yet?" Victoria didn't hide anything and nodded. I've mastered it too." Evelyn Carter laughed, then clenched her fist and continued, "Once I become a sorcerer, I must make the Harlow family realize that in River Zhang Town, there's not only the Harlow family but also the heroine, Evelyn Carter." "I feel the same way," Victoria nodded in agreement. "Good sister." Evelyn Carter patted Victoria's shoulder. Meeting a like-minded friend made her feel a deep sense of connection. As they talked, more and more people gathered in front of the flat-roofed building. Victoria glanced around and noticed that there were at least nearly 1,000 people present. However, judging by their expressions, some looked dejected, some appeared joyful, while others seemed lost in thought, each person's demeanor was different. Among these 1,000 people, some grouped in twos or threes, some formed larger clusters, and some stood alone. Yet, the number of women among them accounted for only about 20%. Chapter 18, Elemental Hall. Victor Knight, the man in black, leisurely stepped out of the mushroom-shaped building. Behind him, 6 young soul masters stood respectfully upright. Instantly, the square fell silent, and all eyes turned toward Victor Knight and the 6 soul masters following behind him. Among these 6, one was named Nicholas Moore. Victor Knight swept his gaze across the crowd, pausing briefly on Victoria before speaking in a deep voice without any unnecessary words, "Follow me." With that, he moved through the crowd, leading the soul masters behind him straight toward an open field in the distance. Victoria and the others followed closely, heading together toward the unclear destination. In truth, the mushroom-shaped building where Victoria lived was situated on slightly elevated terrain. Behind the building stretched a flat grassy area resembling a prairie. The place Victor Knight was heading toward was precisely this grassland. Therefore, after walking for less than 5 minutes, Victor Knight came to a halt. Victoria couldn't help but think to herself, other than wild grass, there's nothing here. Why come all the way out to this place? Could it be to practice the soul summoning technique? Victor Knight, with his back to Victoria and the others, raised his hands, which suddenly emitted a dazzling green light. His entire figure began to transform mysteriously, growing several times larger. Simultaneously, his back became covered with falling dried leaves, giving him an eerie appearance. From the front, one could clearly see that Victor Knight had grown a massive pair of wings, 3 meters long, made entirely of dried leaves. Seeing this scene, everyone present gasped in astonishment. This person is probably at the soul condensation stage, Victoria speculated silently. She knew that only individuals like Iris Storm and Catherine Frost could transform in such a way. The wings on Victor Knight's back flapped toward the empty ground, and immediately, the earth trembled noticeably. Then, under everyone's watchful eyes, a glowing red formation with a diameter of about 3 meters appeared on the barren ground, resembling a burning flame. After completing everything, Victor Knight's massive wings reverted to dry leaves, and the whirlwind dissipated. Without turning back, he said to Nicholas Moore, "You explain to them how to perform the soul summoning technique." Nicholas Moore respectfully responded, then raised his voice to address the crowd. The so-called soul summoning technique, to put it simply, uses soul energy to sense and connect with the spirits within the soul shrine, then summons them to your side. Right now, in front of us is the soul shrine. Those who have reached the 3rd level of soul energy and successfully stabilized it will descend shortly. Once you've summoned a soul, exit through the blue light door in the Great Hall without lingering inside. Additionally, the maximum time allowed inside is half an hour. If you fail to summon a soul within that time, consider it bad luck. Does everyone understand? Understood, nearly 1,000 voices responded in unison. One more thing, Nicholas Moore added sternly, if you haven't reached the 3rd level of soul energy but recklessly enter the soul shrine, you'll meet a grim fate. He continued, now, those who haven't reached the 3rd level of soul energy, step to the right. Those who have reached the 3rd level but haven't stabilized it, move to the left. Those who have stabilized their soul energy, stand in the center. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone instinctively moved to their designated positions. Victoria stood in the center and looked around, noticing that among the nearly 1,000 people, more than half hadn't cultivated soul energy yet. Those who had cultivated it but hadn't stabilized it numbered over 200, while only about 300 stood with her in the center. I didn't expect my aptitude to be considered decent among this group, Victoria thought to herself, feeling a hint of delight. Very good, over 300 people have stabilized the 3rd level of soul energy, Victor Knight remarked, appearing quite satisfied with the number. He nodded and said, you will divide into 2 teams and descend in 2 separate turns. The teams were swiftly organized, and Victoria was placed in the second group. However, facing the bright red formation that resembled flames, those who had not yet become soul masters were genuinely a bit frightened. In the first group, there were several young children, only around 8 or 9 years old, who were scared to tears by the fiery display. Eventually, their companions had to pull them in forcefully. After waiting for about half an hour, people began to emerge one after another from the red formation. Alongside them appeared various types of soul pets, some were animals, some were plants, and some were human-like, though none were elemental types. Of course, there were also a few soul pets that had no combat utility, such as rabbits and lambs, which left some of the soul masters rather frustrated. While everyone was organizing into groups, Victor Knight quietly instructed a soul master behind him, calculate the accumulation points carefully. Each master receives 1 point for taking on a disciple. If the disciple doesn't cultivate up to the 3rd level of soul energy, no points are added. If they reach that level, add 2 points, and if they consolidate their soul energy, add 3 points. Understood? Yes, Master. I understand, a young sorcerer respectfully replied. Next, Victoria and the second group entered the red formation. As she stepped into the red formation, Victoria felt her entire body enveloped by a warm glow, reminiscent of the familiar sensation of being teleported through ruins in the mountains. Then, everything went dark before her eyes, and when her vision cleared, her surroundings had completely changed. It was a circular room with a circumference of about 10 jang. The walls of the room resembled a large arena, but this arena exuded an eerie and terrifying atmosphere. The air was cold and chilling, the space dim and gloomy, and the occasional sounds of ghostly wails and wolf howls echoed. Apart from 8 large doors emitting faint blue light on the walls, there was no other source of illumination. These large blue doors must be the exits after summoning a soul pet, Victoria thought to herself as she glanced upward. Above her, the sky was pitch black, with no visible boundaries, resembling a dark, starless night sky. What is this place? Logically, I should be underground, but why is there a sky? Moreover, it's daytime outside, so the sky shouldn't be this dark. Victoria was utterly baffled. Unable to figure it out, she chose to stop pondering and tried to calm herself. Taking a deep breath, Victoria channeled the soul energy within her body and began sensing the soul connected to her. After the soul energy was activated, Victoria suddenly felt that strange white specters appeared in the pitch-black sky, floating slowly and eerily. Are these specters existing in the form of souls? With so many of them, which one is my soul companion? Seeing the dense multitude of souls, Victoria's soul energy continuously poured out from her body to sense the soul that belonged to her. However, there were far too many wandering spirits in this place. Therefore, Victoria had to keep releasing her soul energy to perceive the souls. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, she still hadn't found the soul that belonged to her. Chapter 19, Full of Traps, Truly a Pitfall. I found my element. Just as Victoria was intensely focused on sensing her soul, an excited voice suddenly echoed. The shout caused quite a commotion immediately. Damn it, even if you've summoned your element, can't you stop screaming like that? Someone in the crowd angrily yelled. Get lost, you idiot. I just started sensing my element, and you interrupted me. Now that you found yours, why don't you hurry up and leave? Another person shouted even more furiously. Victoria initially wanted to join in and curse as well, but seeing that many others had already voiced her thoughts, she decided to ignore them. Instead, she continued to concentrate on gathering magical energy and searching for her soul. The person who had just sensed their element realized they were in the wrong and quickly left the elemental hall with their newfound element. After all, the hall was quite dim, making it hard to see anyone's face clearly. Thus, they didn't worry about being recognized. Time passed quickly. After another moment, more and more people managed to sense their elements and left the elemental hall one by one. However, Victoria was still struggling to connect with her soul, and her efforts continued to yield no results. Another incense stick's worth of time passed. By then, Victoria was the only one left in the vast soul shrine. Outside the elemental hall, Victor Knight noticed the still glowing red formation and frowned. What's going on? Is someone still inside? Go check who it is. Nicholas Moore responded promptly, scanned the crowd, and whispered, Master, it's junior sister Victoria who's still inside. Victor Knight furrowed his brows once more but said nothing further. Nicholas Moore had been around Victor Knight long enough to understand his master's intentions. If the master did not instruct Victoria to come out, it meant they had to continue waiting. Thus, he remained silent, standing aside to wait. While they waited outside, Victoria, inside the elemental hall, couldn't help but feel anxious. At this moment, countless phantoms still floated in the sky, and Victoria was unable to sense any element that could connect with her. Seeing the energy within her body nearly depleted, her anxiety deepened. However, at this critical moment, Victoria's eyes suddenly lit up as she noticed a white phantom slowly changing color. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the entire phantom had turned blue. Could this be the element I need to summon? Victoria speculated. Well, no point overthinking it. Let's try connecting with this unique one. With that thought, Victoria was about to connect with the blue phantom when she suddenly noticed something strange. Another phantom had also turned blue. Victoria looked left and right, unsure which one she should link her soul to. At that moment, she heard a voice calling out, Save me, save me. Victoria froze, attempting to activate her soul energy while using her elemental energy to communicate with the other party. Who are you? I am above you on the top right, you must save me. If I get out, I will surely repay you, a voice echoed. Are you the last spirit that turned blue? Victoria asked uncertainly. Yes, that's me, that's me. Quickly establish an elemental link with me, hurry up, or it will be too late, the voice urged. Why should I trust you? Victoria replied slowly. Tell me first, what abilities do you have? I can fly and carry you through the skies. The spirit seemed extremely anxious. Hearing Victoria's question about its abilities, it hastily responded at lightning speed. Hearing this, Victoria's heart stirred. Could this be a mutated element? The ability to fly in the air, this was indeed a remarkable element. However, Victoria hesitated, unsure of this element's combat capabilities, and asked, Is that all? Seems a bit limited. After speaking, she tried reaching out to another color-changing spirit but received no response. Big sister, being able to fly is already amazing. If you want to establish a soul link with another element, go ahead. But let me tell you, that element is a plant, and it has no attack capabilities whatsoever, let alone the ability to fly. Huh? How do you know? And how dare you call me big sister? Am I that old? Victoria, still unhurried, couldn't help but ask. Look closely. It's stationary in the air. If it were human or an animal, it would have at least tried to communicate with you, the element explained anxiously, fearing time was running out. Hurry up, big sister. If you keep dawdling, it'll really be too late. As sorcerers, we can only sense one element. I don't want to do something I'd regret. Let me ask you one more thing. From your voice, you sound like a woman, but your tone seems masculine. What's going on? Victoria continued pressing. Big sister. I'm begging you, okay? I am a woman. If necessary, I can serve you. Stop rambling already. Hurry up, I'm about to disappear. The element nearly pleaded with desperation in its tone. Victoria shivered slightly, she didn't want to play the role of a Yuri character. She pondered for a moment, genuinely curious about what a woman with wings would be like. Could it be that, in the future, she would ride on her back and soar through the skies? However, Victoria didn't have much time to dwell on such thoughts. She realized that the phantom's body was becoming increasingly faint. Just as it had warned, if she didn't act quickly, the phantom would completely disappear. Without hesitation, Victoria swiftly established a soul connection with the phantom. "Thank you, big sister," the phantom sighed in relief, its body returning to its original blue hue. "No need for thanks. By the way, don't call me big sister, it makes me sound old. Where are you right now?" After forming the soul connection, Victoria could sense the phantom's exact location. Yet, as she glanced around, she couldn't spot the elemental spirit anywhere. "It's a bit dark here. Step outside, and you'll see me," the elemental spirit replied. Victoria figured it made sense and stepped into the blue-lit exit. With a quick motion, her surroundings brightened. Looking around, she found herself back at the starting point, the place she had been before entering the elemental hall. Chapter 20, The Tragic Mutated Elemental. Seeing Victoria step out, Victor Knight couldn't help but glance at her element. That glance made his brows furrow even deeper. Slowly walking up to Victoria, he asked coldly, "Is this the element you took nearly half an hour to sense?" Victoria looked around in confusion. Through soul energy, she could feel the mutated element right beside her, but she just couldn't see it. Curiously, she asked, "Senior, have you already seen it?" Victor Knight let out a cold snort, said nothing more, and flicked his sleeve as he walked away. Behind Victor Knight, Nicholas Moore gently patted Victoria's left shoulder, sighed softly, and said to everyone, "You all stay where you are, sense your own elements, and get familiar with them." Victoria scratched her head in puzzlement. As she raised her hand, she felt something pressing on her right shoulder. Quickly glancing over, she saw a dull gray sparrow staring at her with round eyes. "Go on, go play somewhere else. Where did this sparrow even come from?" Victoria waved her hand, trying to shoo the bird away. However, the sparrow flew in a circle in the air and landed back on Victoria's shoulder. "Still clinging to me, huh?" Victoria grabbed the sparrow, pulled its wings apart, and angrily said, "Why don't you hurry up and leave?" A scene that left Victoria astonished unfolded as she heard a sparrow speak in a human voice, saying, "Big sister, I am the element you sensed. Where do you want me to go? Are you kidding me? You're the element I sensed." Victoria's eyes widened as she stared at the tiny sparrow and asked, "This must be a mistake." "Let me go," the sparrow chirped indignantly. "Are you sure about this?" Victoria questioned again. "You used your energy technique to sense me, didn't you? Do I really need to explain?" The sparrow nodded, looking slightly annoyed. "So, does this mean I'm some sort of weird, mutated summoner now? And you, didn't you say you could fly?" Victoria was so flustered that she could barely get her words out. Using her soul energy, she could definitely feel the element right beside her, but she refused to accept this reality. She knew that if her mutated element truly turned out to be this sparrow, her career as a summoner was doomed. In her frustration, her hands tugged a few feathers from the sparrow. The sparrow squawked in pain, pecked Victoria's hand in retaliation, and seized the chance to escape her grasp. It flapped its wings, soaring into the sky as it called out, "See? I wasn't lying. I'm flying, aren't I? Didn't you also say you could carry me while flying?" Victoria finally had no choice but to admit that this sparrow was indeed her mutated element, though she still asked begrudgingly. "Well, not right now. You'll have to wait until my body grows to twice your size," the sparrow replied smugly, circling in the air. Just as it finished speaking, its overconfidence caused it to crash into a large tree. "When exactly will you grow that big?" Victoria asked impatiently. "Probably in a few thousand years," the sparrow chirped as it rubbed its head with its wing. You, didn't you claim to be female?" Victoria, now fuming, shouted. "I never lied to you. I am female. From the perspective of you humans, I'd technically count as a kind of woman, the sparrow replied, laughing cheekily as it flapped its wings. You brat. Furious, Victoria grabbed a nearby stone and hurled it at the sparrow in the sky. You missed, you missed. The sparrow lightly flapped its wings backward, effortlessly dodging the stone, all the while swaying and speaking. Victoria was fuming with rage. After sensing for half a day, she had managed to summon a sparrow, which left her utterly frustrated. If there had been no communication, she might have reluctantly accepted summoning this sparrow. What infuriated her the most was that the sparrow had deceived her with sweet words. The quarrel between her and the sparrow left the surrounding soul sorcerers exchanging bewildered looks. These individuals had all read in Elemental Principles about an unlucky sorcerer who mistreated their elemental spirit, ultimately being reduced to a mere mortal due to the spirit's self-destruction. None of them had expected someone to start such a grand internal conflict with their own elemental being right after becoming a sorcerer. Sister Victoria, calm down. Yours is at least a mutated element, mine is far worse. Just as Victoria was at a loss about what to do with the sparrow, a voice spoke up beside her. Victoria turned to see Evelyn Carter. Look at this, isn't my element amusing? Evelyn Carter said with a bitter smile, a smile so strained it looked more like a grimace, before releasing her elemental spirit. Following the direction Evelyn Carter pointed, a peculiar cactus sprouted atop her head, standing upright and looking utterly ridiculous. Victoria was momentarily stunned and asked, "Is this cactus your element? What category does it even belong to?" Evelyn Carter helplessly shrugged, silently confirming. "Oh dear, we really are in the same boat." Victoria hugged Evelyn Carter, and moments later, the two seemed ready to cry their hearts out together. After all, it had been so painstaking to cultivate soul energy, to finally reach the third level, and to officially join the ranks of sorcerers, only to discover their summoned elements looked like this. Who wouldn't feel disheartened? As if infected by the emotions of the two, several other sorcerers who had summoned useless elements also felt the weight of their frustration and quietly shed tears. Big sister, have I disappointed you that much? The sparrow flapped its wings in the air and asked Victoria. Shut your mouth. Victoria angrily shouted. I can fly, you see. I'm much better than that cactus over there. The sparrow said indignantly. Can you stop comparing yourself to a cactus? Victoria replied, annoyed. Enough already. At least your element can talk. Look at mine, apart from those decorative poisonous thorns, it seems completely useless. Evelyn Carter complained, pointing at her cactus. Chapter 21, Blood-Soaked Slaughter. You two weak little girls, truly useless. At that moment, a voice as resonant as a bell rang out. Victoria and Evelyn Carter couldn't help but angrily look toward the source of the sound, but upon seeing the person, their expressions immediately turned hesitant. Not far away, a handsome young man was glaring at the two of them with an expression full of disdain. Victoria noticed that this young man had clear, bright eyes and long, flowing hair that exuded elegance and refinement. His sturdy physique and strikingly attractive appearance perfectly embodied the image of a prince in Victoria's heart. This little junior brother, you must be laughing at us, Evelyn Carter was the first to respond, quickly smiling as she spoke. Who's your junior brother? The handsome young man shot Evelyn Carter a cold glance, and suddenly, a white jade object appeared in his hand. The jade flute. Victoria and Evelyn Carter exclaimed in unison, then exchanged glances. This young man seemed like a character straight out of a comic book, and the jade flute in his hand only emphasized his extraordinary talent. What about the jade flute? Humph. The handsome young man cast a sidelong glance at the two of them, gripping the jade flute tightly and moving it up and down. Seeing his actions, Victoria and Evelyn Carter could only smile bitterly. Adrian Blake, look, isn't my spirit beast impressive? At that moment, a summoner dressed in light blue robes approached the handsome young man, a small tabby cat walking beside him, speaking gently. Victoria was inwardly startled. Why does it have to be a mutated summoner again? Just so unlucky. Why are you following me? Adrian Blake, a handsome teenager, clearly showed some disdain for the girl in the light blue dress. He grabbed Victoria's hand and said, "From now on, she's my girlfriend, so please stop following me." The girl in the light blue dress glared at Victoria like a venomous snake, stayed silent for a moment, then turned and walked away. "Damn it, kid, are you kidding me? I'm still a virgin, untouched and sealed." Victoria shouted angrily, her ladylike demeanor vanishing completely. The girl in the light blue dress, Evelyn Carter, and Adrian Blake were all around the same age as Victoria. Although Victoria always avoided discussions of marriage, she fully understood the meaning behind the word girlfriend that Adrian Blake had just used. "What's wrong? Are you scared now?" Adrian Blake asked with a mischievous grin. Victoria snorted coldly, shook her head, and snapped angrily, "Scared of you? Not a chance." However, in her heart, she thought, who wouldn't be scared? That guy's mutated element is a tabby cat, and cats love toying with little birds. One bite, and my little sparrow's gone. This is bad, really bad. At that moment, on the expansive grassy field, among nearly 1,000 people, over 300 had become mages. The rest were either yet to develop magical abilities or had developed them but hadn't solidified their power. They looked at the 300 newly minted mages with a mix of admiration and a bit of pity for those who had awakened useless elemental powers, though the admiration was hard to conceal. Anyway, as long as one can sense an element, they can at least be considered a sorcerer. However, those who possess magical energy but lack an elemental affinity cannot, in principle, be called sorcerers. Thus, sorcerers naturally gathered together, communicating with their elements to better understand one another. Of course, Victoria was an exception. Her sparrow, apart from circling endlessly in the air, rarely made a sound. Yet, judging by its movements, it seemed to be mocking her, reigniting the anger Victoria had struggled so hard to suppress. Half an hour later, Nicholas Moore approached the group alone, sweeping his gaze over everyone before declaring, "We'll now begin the assignments. Line up according to your category. Those who haven't cultivated magical energy, form one line. Those who haven't stabilized their magical energy, form another. Those with useless elemental affinities, form yet another line. The rest, regular sorcerers, form the last line. Move quickly, and don't blame me for being harsh if anyone stands in the wrong line." With that, he waved his hand, summoning a whirlwind. A strange-looking general appeared within it. "What's going on?" The general grumbled in displeasure as soon as he emerged. Without hesitation, Nicholas Moore sent a blue light beam at the general, then pointed to a spot beside him. Only then did the general respectfully step aside. Under the intimidating presence of the general, everyone quickly fell into their respective lines. Victoria, considering herself part of the useless element group, naturally joined that line. Alongside her were Evelyn Carter and a young man named Adrian Blake. To her surprise, her line was quite large, with at least over 100 people. "Now, I shall announce." Nicholas Moore pointed to the line of regular sorcerers and smiled. "You all belong to the combat sorcerer category. Naturally, you'll receive better treatment. I'll have a surprise for you shortly." Hearing this, the regular sorcerers immediately looked delighted. "As for the rest of you," Nicholas Moore gestured toward Victoria's group. "You belong to the support sorcerer category. Your future tasks will be arduous. Among support sorcerers, some will mine ores, others will cultivate herbs, some will forge weapons, and others will craft defensive items. In short, there are many roles. I'll assign your specific duties shortly." Hearing these words, the magicians on Victoria's side all sighed deeply, realizing that tough days were ahead. But no one could be blamed, after all, their elemental skills were inferior to others. As for those youngsters who have yet to solidify their magic skills, I'll give you 7 more days. If you still can't manage it, you'll be reassigned to another group, Nicholas Moore continued. What about us? Can we go home? Someone from the group who couldn't cultivate magic skills asked. Dream on. Nicholas Moore shouted angrily, once you've arrived at the Grand Convergence Palace, unless you die, no one is allowed to leave. What did you say? On what grounds are you keeping us here? The person raised his hand in fury, demanding an answer. On this ground, Nicholas Moore sneered, pointing at the general beside him. The general, with a cold expression, knelt on one knee and said, Master, what are your orders? Anyone who dares to defy my command will be executed without mercy. Nicholas Moore declared sternly. Understood. The general stood up, and as if by magic, a long blade appeared in his hand. He swept his sharp gaze across the noisy crowd, exuding authority. Instantly,